A storm rolled quietly across the dune sea. Sand whispered against the walls of a forgotten settlement called Mars Espa, a place where people were not born into freedom, but into debt. And among those nameless lives, a boy came into existence without a father. His mother, Shmi Skywalker, could not explain it. When the Jedi asked her years later how it happened, she said only, "There was no father. I carried him. I gave birth. I raised him." The galaxy never understood those words. But the Force did. The child's name was Anakin, and from the moment he took his first breath, something ancient moved around him, like a current rediscovering its source. He would laugh as a baby when sandstorms raged outside, calm when others were afraid. To Shmi, he felt different. To those who owned her, he was useful. And to the Force, he was destiny incarnate. Tatooine was not a world for dreams. The suns burned away hope before it could take root. Slaves lived by the will of others, marked not by their names, but by transmitters buried in their flesh. And yet, in that life of dust and servitude, the boy's presence brought warmth. He could mend broken machines that no one else could fix. He could sense when danger was near. He could see what others missed, the small beauty in a universe that never looked his way. Shmi watched him every night, knowing something larger waited for him beyond those twin suns. But she also knew that such gifts were never free. Those the Force touches most deeply, it never leaves untouched. As Anakin grew, he began to ask questions no slave should ask. "Why are people free?" he'd whisper. "Why can't we go where we want?" His mother would smile softly, hiding the fear in her voice. "Because that's the way the galaxy is," she'd tell him. But even as a child, he did not accept that answer. He built things simple, broken things that should not have worked. A droid that spoke. A pod racer far too complex for a boy his age. He had never read the manuals, never studied the designs. He knew them as though the knowledge had been placed there long before he was born. And every creation was a small act of rebellion, a quiet reminder that he refused to be defined by the chains that bound him. But the Force was not done revealing itself. There were moments when the air around him seemed alive, when danger would bend away, when instincts became prophecy. Shmi began to sense it too, that her son's path would one day lead him far from her arms. And that when it did, she would never see him again. The galaxy beyond Tatooine had forgotten people like her. But the Force had not. Across the stars, a ripple had already begun, whispers in the minds of the Jedi. Dreams of balance, of a child born of the Force itself. They did not yet know his name, but they felt him, even from across the void. Anakin Skywalker was the center of something vast, something that neither Jedi nor Sith could yet comprehend. A convergence, a disturbance, a beginning that was not meant to be peaceful. In the dust of Mars Espa, a slave boy looked up at the sky and watched the stars burn against the night. He wondered what it would feel like to touch them, to be among them, to be free. And though he could not yet understand it, the stars were already watching back. Because the galaxy had waited 1,000 generations for this child. The boy who would bring balance. The boy who would burn it all. Anakin Skywalker had never seen rain. He had never felt trees, or walked through grass, or tasted anything that didn't come from a ration block. His entire world was dry and hot, and small a space between the junkyards and the slave quarters. Watto owned him. A Toydarian junk dealer with wings too small and debts too deep. He saw Anakin not as a boy, but as a bargain cheap labor with unusually quick hands. But Anakin never resented him. Not fully. He didn't have the time to hate. He was too busy surviving. Each morning began before the sun. Wiring repulsor lifts, cleaning power converters, hauling scrap across the scorching sands of Mos Espa. Other children played in the alleys. Anakin worked, but still, somehow, he smiled. He didn't know he was suffering. Not yet. He loved to build, to tinker, to make the broken whole again. Machines made sense to him, unlike people. They didn't lie. They didn't ignore him. And when they stopped working, he could fix them. It was the one kind of power he had. Deep inside a storage room behind Watto's shop, he worked on a secret. A protocol droid, made from scavenged limbs and mismatched panels. He called it C-3PO. Not a gift, not a tool, a friend. Because even with his mother beside him, Anakin often felt alone, and worse, forgotten. The other slaves whispered about the boy who dreamed too much. They said he was strange, touched in the head, or cursed. But he never cared. He would stare up at the stars and say, "I'm going to be the first one to see them all." No one listened. No one believed. But Shmi did. Every night, she'd sit beside him as he fell asleep, brushing the sand from his hair, hiding the sadness in her voice. "You have a destiny," she'd whisper. "You were meant for more than this." And though she never said it aloud, she knew what it meant. That the day was coming when she would lose him. In public, Anakin was quiet, obedient, invisible. But inside, he burned. He couldn't understand why people were allowed to suffer. Why the Hutts ruled over everything. Why the Republic never came. Why the Jedi, with all their power, never freed the slaves. He would ask his mother, "Don't they know we're here?" She would only answer, "They know." And that answer stayed with him. More than the beatings. More than the sandstorms. More than the endless days of heat and hunger. They knew, and they chose not to help. The Force grew restless inside him. Even without knowing what it was, he could feel it. In his reflexes, in his anger, in the way doors would shake when he screamed, in the way people stepped aside without knowing why. It wasn't power. Not yet. It was pain. Unshaped, but waiting. One day, a sandstorm hit Mos Espa harder than any in years. Anakin dragged an old woman to shelter, carrying her alone across the market. People said it was impossible, but he did it. No reward, no recognition, just a moment of choice to help, even when no one else would. That night, he told his mother, "One day, I'm going to stop them all. The slavers, the thieves, the bad people." And she held him tighter than she ever had before. Not because he was wrong, but because she believed him. And because she knew what people must become to make such promises real. Anakin Skywalker was still a boy, but the chains around him were already cracking. Not from outside force, but from the storm, quietly building inside. Some nights, Anakin didn't sleep. He would lie awake, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, listening to the low hum of power converters outside. But in his mind, he wasn't in Mos Espa anymore. He was flying. He saw ships he'd never touched. Starfighters painted in gold. Jedi wielding blades of light. He saw oceans and forests and cities in the clouds, and always a voice in the dark calling his name. They weren't dreams, not really. They felt more like memories from a life that hadn't happened yet. A life he belonged to, but couldn't reach. His mother worried. The other slaves whispered. But the boy only smiled. He didn't understand the Force. He didn't know that it was already reaching through him, showing him fragments, warnings, possibilities. He thought it was normal, that everyone saw what he did. During the day, he raced. Not in real tournaments, no one let a human do that. But in the alleys, in simulations he built from scrap. And sometimes, when Watto let him test a pod racer engine, he would close his eyes and still win. He wasn't fast because he trained. He was fast because something moved through him. Something no one else had. His reflexes were beyond human. His mind processed faster than thought. He moved like the Force was his shadow. Watto noticed. And for the first time, he saw more than profit. He saw something strange. And strange made people nervous. Don't use your tricks, Watto warned one day. Just fly. But Anakin didn't know how to separate them. The Force wasn't a power he turned on. It was always there. It was him. The older Anakin got, the more the dreams changed. They grew darker. He saw flashes of fire, screams in metal corridors, a woman crying his name. He would wake up with tears he couldn't explain, anger he didn't understand, and more than anything, fear. He was afraid of losing things, afraid of being left behind, afraid that the stars he longed for would forget him. His mother tried to reassure him, but the Force was louder, and it whispered truths she couldn't silence. One day, while exploring a cave beyond the junkyards, Anakin found something ancient buried beneath the sand. A piece of durasteel with markings older than the Republic. It called to him, not in words but in feeling. It made his hands tremble. He showed it to no one. He just stared at it, wondering what kind of galaxy had made it, and what kind of war had left it here. Something in him awakened that day. A sense that the galaxy was older than the Jedi claimed. That something forgotten was waiting to return, and that he somehow was connected to it. He didn't want glory. He didn't want power. He only wanted a place to belong. A name that meant more than a number in a slave registry. He wanted to matter. But on Tatooine, those dreams had nowhere to go. They stayed buried like the ship fragments in the cave. Waiting. He told his mother he would leave one day. He didn't know how. He just felt it. And when he said it, her eyes changed. She said nothing. Only held him in silence, as though trying to remember how he felt in her arms before the galaxy took him. Anakin Skywalker was 9 years old, a slave, a mechanic, a dreamer, and already the Force was bending around him. It would not leave him here. It never meant to. Because prophecy does not stay buried. And neither do the storms that come before war. The stranger came on a hot, blue morning when the market smelled of overheated metal and oil. Qui-Gon Jinn walked slowly through the stalls, his robe dusted with sand, his face patient and calm. He watched the boy work without announcing himself. It felt like the Force settling into a room. Anakin barely looked up. He was focused on a speeder generator, hands dark with grease. The stranger knelt as if to tie his boot, and asked, quietly, "Who is this boy?" Qui-Gon did not need an answer. There was a presence about the child that the Jedi called destiny. A droid chimed, awkward and polite. C-3PO announced himself with nervous courtesy. The boy smiled at the droid as if it were a private thing, and the stranger watched with relief. He had come far for that smile. Watto, wings fluttering and temper ready, argued first and loudest. He counted his wares, his winnings. No Republic coin changed hands on Tatooine. Qui-Gon offered parts and credits, a trade meant to buy one thing: a boy's freedom. Watto hissed and refused. He said no pod racer was worth 2 slaves. He refused to free the sun alone until a wager had been set. The race came like lightning. The Boonta Eve Classic burned the air. Engines screamed and sand rose like banners. Anakin climbed into a crude cockpit and closed his eyes the way someone closes a prayer. The podracer moved under him like a living thing. When engines roared, he moved as if the machines answered to a voice only he could hear. The crowd shouted, and the track chewed at metal and flesh. The boy steered with a calm that was not learned. He outran racers who had spent their lives on those tracks. When he crossed the finish, the arena erupted, but the noise felt distant. He only remembered the sky and the small quiet in his chest that said the wager had worked. After the race, the balance shifted. Honoring his wager, Watto released the boy from servitude. Anakin held winnings that meant more than credits. It meant a choice. Qui-Gon folded the boy's fate into his hands and spoke about a future where Anakin would learn to listen to the Force and be taught by the Order. Obi-Wan stood nearby, young and watchful. He listened more than he spoke, measuring the boy the way an apprentice might measure a lesson. Qui-Gon's certainty was plain to him, though the Council had not yet agreed. The older Jedi believed the Force had arranged the meeting, and he would not leave without taking the child. Shmi stood beside them, pale and still, every line of her face a map of worry. When Qui-Gon asked what she would have him do, she said what mothers say when storms gather: "You must go. This is the chance you were meant for." She did not ask to be taken. She believed that freedom for her son was everything. He left with Qui-Gon with no fanfare. The boy who had been a nameless tool crossed into a larger darkness and light. As he walked away from junkyards, the wind lifted the edges of his tunic, and for the first time he saw stars without yearning. The cost was heavy. His mother stayed behind. The promise was heavier still. That night, the sky over Mos Espa did not change. The suns burned the same, but the space a mother held at her son's side became hollow. The Jedi thought they had found balance. A mother believed she had given her child a chance. A boy believed in a sky that no longer felt unreachable. None of them yet understood how close the bargain had cut to the heart. The Jedi Temple stood high above Coruscant, 5 towers piercing the sky like ancient spears. It was a place of peace, of silence, of history carved in stone. But to Anakin Skywalker, it never felt warm. He arrived, still grieving. The desert wind of Tatooine hadn't left his mind, and neither had the image of his mother watching him disappear into the stars. The moment the ship landed, he was no longer a boy. He was an initiate, a student of the Jedi Order, a child bound not by chains but by expectations. Inside the temple, children laughed and meditated in harmony. They had grown up here, raised from infancy. But Anakin was older, stronger, and too different. The other younglings looked at him with curiosity, some with envy and others with fear. He could sense all of it, every doubt, every whisper, every judgment. It sank into his skin like cold air. The Jedi taught that emotion was a current to be quieted, that fear must be let go. That attachment was dangerous. But Anakin's entire life had been shaped by fear, by love, by attachment to the one person who had given everything for him. And now, the Order expected him to forget her. He didn't understand. He didn't want to understand. He wanted to return to see her, just for a day, but that day never came. And when he asked Master Yoda why he still missed her so badly, the Jedi Master only answered, "Train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose." Anakin said nothing, but inside, the words hit like stone. The temple's halls were wide, but they echoed with silence. Lessons came in waves: lightsaber drills, Force meditation, history of wars long past. Anakin passed them all with ease. He was fast. Too fast. Where other students studied for years to grasp simple techniques, he understood them in days. It was not learning, it was remembering. Even his instructors seemed unsure how to handle him. Mace Windu kept his distance. Yoda watched with quiet concern. Some masters believed in him. Others saw a warning. No one saw a child who still woke up reaching for a mother who wasn't there. At night, Anakin would sit alone in the training room, blindfolded, practicing against droids with his lightsaber set to training mode. Each strike was perfect, but it brought him no peace. He didn't want to be impressive. He wanted to feel whole. The temple offered structure but not comfort. The Jedi offered discipline but not affection. And Anakin, though surrounded by thousands, began to feel more alone than he ever had as a slave. They told him he was special, that he had the highest midi-chlorian count ever recorded, that he might be the chosen one. But he didn't feel chosen. He felt lost, like a tool no one knew how to use. Only one thing kept him anchored: Obi-Wan. Not a father, not quite a brother, but something close to both. Their bond was still forming. The pain of losing Qui-Gon lingered between them, but Obi-Wan tried every day, and Anakin, though proud and impatient, listened. Because beneath all his anger, he wanted to be accepted. He wanted to make someone proud again. But even Obi-Wan could not quiet what had begun to stir inside him. Anakin's power grew, but his doubts grew faster. The temple was sacred, but to him, it felt like a cage made of stone, not sand. And every night, in the silence between thoughts, he wondered if the Jedi would ever truly understand him, or if they only hoped to control him. The first time Obi-Wan Kenobi looked at Anakin as a Padawan, he felt the weight of a promise not his own, but Qui-Gon's. His master had believed the boy was the chosen one. Dying breath, blood on his lips, he made Obi-Wan swear to train him. It was not love that began their bond. It was duty. And yet, over time, something real began to grow between them. Not father and son, not quite brothers, but a connection forged in war and silence, discipline and defiance. They were both trying to become something they didn't feel ready for. Obi-Wan, a teacher too young. Anakin, a student too powerful. The temple assigned them missions far from Coruscant. Negotiations, disputes, relief efforts. Obi-Wan taught him control, posture, serenity. Anakin responded with questions, with improvisation, with instinct. He broke forms without meaning to. He moved through combat as if the Force had already choreographed it for him. But he was reckless, impatient, disobedient in small ways. He would interfere when Jedi weren't meant to. He would act before the Council gave permission. And Obi-Wan, though firm, often found himself hesitating, not out of weakness, but because he saw what no one else would admit. Anakin was not like the others. He felt too much. And when he cared about something, he held onto it with everything inside him. On Anshan, during a tense standoff with tribal warriors, Anakin made a choice that saved a child from a collapsing cliff but nearly cost the mission. The council reprimanded him afterward. Obi-Wan didn't. He understood. The boy couldn't walk away from suffering. He couldn't close himself off the way the code demanded. Still, Obi-Wan reminded him, compassion is encouraged. Attachment is not. Anakin nodded, but inside, the line blurred. How could one feel compassion, but not connection? How could you protect someone if you weren't willing to risk everything for them? He began to question the code, not openly, but in quiet moments, in how he looked at people, in how he hesitated to leave places where suffering lingered. He didn't understand why the Jedi were keepers of peace, but so often stood still in the face of injustice. And sometimes Obi-Wan saw that frustration in him and feared it. Their bond strengthened with time, even when they clashed. In battle, they moved as one. In silence, they shared a strange trust. Obi-Wan had become something Anakin didn't know how to name. A guide, a rival, a tether. Someone who believed in him when the council wouldn't. But he was not a father. He couldn't be. Not in the Order. Anakin had no one else to turn to when the memories crept in. When dreams of his mother returned. When flashes of Tatooine burned behind his eyes. The Jedi told him to let go. But Obi-Wan, in rare, quiet moments, would listen. "You miss her," he said once, during a journey through the Mid-Rim. "I see her," Anakin replied, "every night, and I can't do anything." There was no answer, just silence, just the hum of the ship around them. Anakin began to mask it. The pain, the longing, the anger. He laughed more. He trained harder. He argued louder. But inside, he felt a quiet desperation. The more he tried to be what they wanted, the more he felt like he was disappearing. The Jedi were raising a warrior, but he needed something else. He needed someone to say they understood, that he didn't have to let go of love to be good. But love was not the Jedi way, and fear was growing behind the silence. Fear was not new to Anakin Skywalker. It had lived in him since childhood, in the way he flinched at the crack of a slaver's whip, in the way he watched his mother's hands tremble when she lied about being fine. The Jedi told him fear was the path to the dark side, but for Anakin, it had been the path to survival. He never spoke of it. Not to Obi-Wan, not to the Council. They could sense his emotion in the Force, but they mistook it for passion, not pain. They saw a prodigy, not a child trying to unlearn terror. Every time Yoda told him to release fear, he wanted to scream, because fear was all he had ever known. It was the only reason he was still alive. He dreamed of Tatooine more often now, of his mother's voice fading in the wind, of sand turning red under twin suns. He would wake in his quarters at the temple, the sheets tangled and damp with sweat, feeling the Force hum beneath his skin like an open wound. But the Council did not see those nights. They saw results. They saw progress. And when he meditated, they praised his calm, never realizing it was only exhaustion. The Council chambers were lined with sunlight. It looked peaceful. But to Anakin, it felt like judgment. Every time he entered that circle of masters, he could feel their doubts press against his mind. They still whispered about him when he left. Too old, they said. Too dangerous. They thought he didn't hear, but he always did. Once, Mace Windu told Obi-Wan, "The boy has power we cannot control." Anakin pretended not to notice. But that single sentence stayed with him for years. The Jedi believed that knowledge and discipline would tame him. But they were wrong. Discipline is a cage, and Anakin had lived in cages long enough to know how to break them. He wasn't angry, yet not fully. He was just alone. No matter how high he rose, the air around him always felt thin, cold, unreachable. When he began taking missions alone, the silence only grew heavier. On Tatooine, he helped rebuild a village destroyed by raiders. When a child clung to his robes and asked if the Jedi would stay to protect them, Anakin had no answer. The code forbade attachment. The council forbade permanence. So the Jedi left. And Anakin watched their ship rise into the sky, wondering how peace could mean leaving people behind. He began to fear something deeper, not death, not loss, but helplessness. The same helplessness he'd felt as a boy when he couldn't protect his mother. The same helplessness he'd felt when Qui-Gon died before his eyes. The Force flowed through him like a river, but it offered no comfort. It only reminded him how much he could not save. And in that space, fear became anger. Quiet, slow, almost invisible but growing. Obi-Wan tried to reach him, but he couldn't see the full picture. He saw frustration, not despair. When he scolded Anakin for arrogance, Anakin only bowed his head. Because the truth was worse than arrogance. It was guilt. Guilt for being too powerful to be ordinary, and too broken to be whole. He began to hide his visions, his doubts, his emotions. He smiled when he had to. He played the part of the perfect Padawan. And when the masters looked at him and said, "He is becoming stronger," they never realized what that strength cost. The Jedi thought fear was the enemy. But they never asked what happened when you told a frightened boy to be fearless. Because the fear they ignored was the one that would one day destroy them all. The dreams returned with blood in them. Anakin Skywalker stood in a field of fire. Somewhere in the distance, his mother screamed. Her voice was distant but unmistakable. She was in pain, calling for him, pleading. He ran toward her through waves of heat and shadow, but his legs felt like stone. No matter how fast he moved, she kept slipping further away. And then, silence. He would wake breathless, heart racing. The stars outside his window unmoved, indifferent. And yet, he knew. These weren't just dreams. He had always seen things before they happened. On Tatooine, it had helped him survive. In the temple, it helped him fight. But this was different. These were not flickers of instinct. These were visions, and they were growing stronger. At first, he tried to ignore them. The Jedi taught that the future was always in motion, that attachment clouded perception, that fear corrupted foresight. But this wasn't fear. It was certainty. He knew his mother was in danger. He told Obi-Wan. The response came like a closed door. Dreams pass in time. Anakin said nothing more, because he knew what came next. A lecture about letting go. A reminder about the code. An empty comfort from a man who didn't have a mother to lose. So he watched the skies in silence. The pain in his visions grew sharper. Now he saw flashes of faces, Tusken raiders, fires, bones. And always, his mother's voice fading into nothing. He tried to meditate. But the calm the masters spoke of never came. He tried to speak to Yoda. The ancient Jedi simply closed his eyes and said, "Attachment leads to jealousy, the shadow of greed, that is." But this wasn't about greed. It was about love. The kind of love that had kept him alive. The kind of love the Jedi feared. So, he stopped asking. And he made a decision the Council would never allow. He would go back to Tatooine. It took weeks to find a transport. He told Obi-Wan it was a diplomatic detour. The lie burned in his chest, but not enough to stop him. When he landed, the sons of Tatooine felt crueler than he remembered. The world had not waited for him. Nothing had changed. Dust still choked the wind. Mos Espa still stank of sweat and rust. And his mother was nowhere to be found. Watto was older, weaker. He told Anakin what he knew. Shmi had been sold to a moisture farmer named Lars and later freed. She had married, but recently she'd been taken. Tusken Raiders. The moment Anakin heard the words, he felt something break. He took a speeder and rode into the desert alone. No plan, no permission, only the Force and the fire in his chest. He found the camp just before dusk. There were no negotiations, no warnings, only a blade of blue fire cutting through tents and bodies and bone. By the time it was over, the sand was red, and Anakin was kneeling beside his mother's body. She died in his arms, and something inside him died with her. He brought her body back to the Lars homestead. They buried her beneath the Tatooine suns. But Anakin didn't mourn like a Jedi. He mourned like a son, like a boy who had tried to forget where he came from, only to arrive too late to make it matter. When he returned to Coruscant, he told no one what had happened. The Council never asked. Obi-Wan never pushed. And Anakin, already hollowed by guilt, buried the truth beneath silence. But the visions didn't stop. They only changed. New shadows now. A woman dying in childbirth, his hands failing her. A cry he couldn't stop. The Jedi had trained him to look outward, but his gaze was turning inward, toward things he could not protect, toward people he could not save, toward futures he would burn entire worlds to change. And somewhere, deep beneath the temple, the Force began to tremble, because the Jedi had asked him to silence the very voice that was trying to warn him. When Anakin Skywalker saw her again, 10 years had passed since a boy said goodbye to a queen on a landing platform. But time had done nothing to soften the shape of her in his memory. Padme Amidala walked into the Jedi briefing room on Coruscant, and the Force itself seemed to pause. He spoke her name softly. She turned with the poise of someone trained to be strong under watchful eyes. But even behind her formality, he saw it. A flicker of warmth, recognition. Memory shared but unspoken. He smiled. She hesitated. To Padme, Anakin was still the boy who had asked if she was an angel. To Anakin, she had never been anything less than one. The Jedi assigned him to protect her. There had been an attempt on her life, a bomb meant for her transport. The Republic was unraveling from the inside, and Padme, still a senator of Naboo, stood in the path of decisions meant to ignite a war. Anakin took the assignment like a gift from the Force. Obi-Wan took it like a test. "You'll be careful," his master warned. "You'll follow the code." Anakin nodded, but part of him had already stopped listening. They hid in the shadows of the city at first. Senate towers, private platforms, decoy schedules. But after another attack, the Council sent them to Naboo, her homeworld. It was supposed to be safer. Farther from politics, farther from danger. It wasn't. The lake country shimmered with quiet. Flowers grew in silence there, and the breeze made it easy to forget duty. Naboo was not a battlefield. not a temple, not a desert. For Anakin, it was the first place since Tatooine that felt like peace. But peace made room for truth. And Anakin, no longer a child, could no longer hide how he felt. He watched her speak in long, quiet sentences. He listened to her fears about the Republic, how it was falling apart from within. She carried the galaxy like it was her responsibility to fix. And in that burden, he saw himself. She reminded him of his mother, not in presence, but in heart, strong, gentle, brave enough to walk into danger, but afraid to be vulnerable. She smiled, but he could see what it cost her. And beneath it all, something impossible began to grow between them. It wasn't sudden, it didn't need to be. A glance across a garden, a pause too long after laughter, his hand brushing hers on a balcony railing. The things not said, the silence that stretched between them like thread. Padme resisted. She reminded him of the Jedi code, that love was forbidden, that attachment was dangerous, that if they began something, it would have to remain hidden forever. But Anakin didn't see danger in love. He saw salvation. "I'm not afraid," he told her once, as the sun set over the lake. And she didn't answer, because neither of them truly was. They were afraid of what would happen if they said yes, but even more afraid of what would happen if they didn't. Naboo was not a mission. It was a threshold. The place where the Jedi Padawan stopped pretending to be untouchable. The place where the senator stopped pretending she was only a servant of the people. They were two people trained to serve others. And in this quiet corner of the galaxy, they chose to serve each other in secret, in silence, in defiance of everything they'd been told. The war had not started yet, but already the galaxy was being reshaped. Not by battles, but by a single, hidden truth. That Anakin Skywalker was falling in love. And love in a Jedi's heart casts the longest shadow. The wedding was small. No guests. No temple choir. No witnesses, except for a droid and a man who had once guarded secrets of his own. It happened on Naboo beneath the stone arches of a lakeside villa while the galaxy turned quietly toward war. Padme wore a veil the color of moonlight. Anakin wore no Jedi robes. Only silence and devotion. There were no vows beyond what they already knew. They could not go back. In that moment, they became something more than lovers. More than husband and wife. They became a fracture. One the galaxy would never see until it was too late. When they returned to Coruscant, the Republic was unraveling faster. Systems declared secession. The Jedi were being stretched thin, pulled from peacekeeping to open warfare. Clone troopers were being bred in secret on Kamino. And a shadow moved quietly in the heart of the Senate. But none of it mattered more to Anakin than her. They couldn't be seen together. Not in public. Not among Jedi. Their bond existed between stolen glances, late-night visits, and encrypted transmissions through hyperspace. She became his center, the thing that grounded him when the galaxy spun too fast. The one person who knew him not as a Jedi, not as a weapon, not as a prophecy, but as a man. And yet, even in love, Anakin was afraid. Because now he had something to lose. He became more protective, more anxious. The thought of Padme in danger in Senate meetings, in war zones, in places he couldn't follow consumed him. He began to question the Jedi's rules more openly. He argued with Obi-Wan. He challenged the Council's decisions. They thought it was pride, but it wasn't. It was fear, disguised as defiance. To Anakin, the Jedi Code began to feel cruel. Not just because it forbade attachment, but because it demanded he ignore the only thing that made him feel alive. He began keeping things from Obi-Wan. Not just about Padme, but about his dreams, his visions. He no longer believed the Council could help him. And that belief would grow into silence. And that silence into separation. Padme, too, began to feel the strain. She loved him, that was never in doubt. But she saw how war hardened him. She saw how each mission pulled him further from the gentle, curious boy she had once known. He came home different, quieter, heavier. There were days he didn't sleep, nights when he woke gasping, clutching her like she might vanish. She asked what haunted him. He said, "I'm fine." But his eyes said otherwise. There were times she wondered what they had done. Whether this bond, beautiful and impossible, was healing him or breaking him. But then he would smile. And for a moment, the galaxy disappeared. Their love existed in the cracks of a failing system. They carved space for it in places never meant to hold such things. An empty hallway in the Senate. A rooftop beneath temple shadows. The cockpit of a starfighter waiting for launch. They were Jedi and senator, but also husband and wife. And in their attempt to keep the galaxy from finding out, they began to hide parts of themselves from each other. Not because they didn't trust each other, but because they were afraid that if they looked too closely at what they had built, they would see how fragile it had become. Love was never the sin. It was the silence, the secrecy, the slow erosion of truth. And even as Anakin held Padme close, he had already begun to lose her. Not in death, but in distance. And in the silence where Jedi fear to listen, the dark side waits. The war made everything harder to hide. Anakin Skywalker became a general, not by choice, by decree. He led clones into battle before he had even finished his Jedi trials. And with every campaign, his reputation grew. Not just as a warrior, but as a symbol. To some, a hero. To others, a threat. He no longer had time to rest. Nor did the Republic. One system fell after another. The Separatists struck deeper. And Anakin, always at the front, began to change. He saw too much. Blood, loss, betrayal. He watched Jedi fall, not just in combat, but in spirit. Their calm began to fray. Their certainty wore thin. And still, the Council asked for more. More loyalty, more trust, more obedience. Anakin gave them none of it. He began questioning orders. Not to be rebellious, but because he believed he knew better. And too often, he did. The Jedi played politics. He acted. Obi-Wan noticed first. Their bond had shifted. Once student and teacher, now equals in war, but never in trust. They disagreed more, argued. Obi-Wan pleaded for restraint. Anakin called him blind. Yet beneath every word, there was still affection, still belief. But cracks were forming. Not from hate, from silence. The Council grew wary. They saw the lines he crossed, the power he used without permission, and the darkness he didn't even try to hide anymore. They watched him closer, but they never reached out. Not to understand, only to control. Palpatine noticed that too. The Chancellor had always spoken to Anakin with warmth. not as a Jedi, not as a soldier, as a person. He praised his victories. He listened to his doubts. He called him the greatest of all Jedi, when the Council still questioned his place. Anakin began confiding in him, just enough to feel seen. And Palpatine fed that hunger with careful hands. He spoke of corruption in the Order, of hypocrisy, of weakness disguised as virtue. And Anakin, already feeling the weight of Jedi judgment, began to wonder if the Chancellor was right. Meanwhile, Padme watched from the sidelines. She saw the man she loved growing more distant. Not in heart, but in spirit. His eyes darker, his voice sharper. She asked if he was okay. He said he was tired. But it wasn't exhaustion. It was erosion. They spent less time together. Their meetings shortened, filled with tension. Love remained, but peace was slipping away. She began to worry not for their marriage, for his soul. One day, Anakin was summoned to the council chamber alone. They told him the Chancellor had appointed him as his personal representative. The council agreed, but not without suspicion. They wanted him to spy on the man who had been his only confidant. Anakin stood silent as they made their request. They didn't ask, they told. And with that command, the final thread of trust between him and the council began to fray. He left the chamber in silence, and the weight in his chest turned to heat. When he returned to Padme, she asked what was wrong. He didn't answer, because now he was caught between two masters. The Jedi, who saw him as a tool they didn't trust, and Palpatine, who promised him a destiny no one else believed in. He didn't know who to believe anymore. Only that, if he chose wrong, he might lose everything. And in that confusion, in that pain, a door quietly opened within him, one the Jedi could not close, because they had never truly opened one in the first place. She stood on the balcony, hands resting against the smooth stone rail. The Coruscant skyline blinked like a starfield turned sideways, cold and artificial. Padme Amidala no longer found comfort in the view. The city was too quiet, and in the silence, fear had begun to grow. Anakin had changed. Not all at once. Not in a way most people would notice. But she felt it in the pauses between his words, in the way he stared too long at the floor, in the way he gripped her hand like it might vanish. When he returned from missions now, he didn't talk about the war. He talked about her safety, about dreams he couldn't explain, about death, about her dying. She tried to calm him, tried to tell him she was healthy, alive, right here. But the visions wouldn't stop, and neither would the fear. He had dreamed of his mother's death, and she died. Now, he dreamed of Padme, in pain, screaming, dying in childbirth. He never said the words out loud, but the fear lived in his eyes, and it changed him. He began asking questions no Jedi would dare. About life, about death, about how far the Force could bend before it broke. When Padme told him that maybe it was just a dream, he only stared. "It's not a dream," he said. "I won't let it happen again." He went to the council. They gave him riddles. Meditate. Let go. Be mindful. But mindfulness didn't save his mother. And Anakin had decided it would not be the reason he lost Padme. He went to Yoda last, quietly, desperate. The Grand Master heard him out, then gave him the same answer he had once given before. Train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose. But Anakin no longer believed that was strength. He believed it was surrender, and he would not surrender Padme. He began to drift further from the Order. Even Obi-Wan noticed it now. They still fought together, still laughed on rare days, but something was broken between them. A distance neither could name. And while the Jedi planned for battle, the Chancellor whispered of power. Palpatine spoke of ancient teachings, of Darth Plagueis, of the ability to prevent death. Anakin didn't ask how. He only listened. Because someone finally offered an answer. Not a warning, not a lesson, a promise. Padme watched him slip away. She tried to reach him, tried to remind him of the boy who once told her he wanted to free slaves. The man who jumped into danger to protect those who could not protect themselves. The Jedi who believed peace was possible. But every time she spoke of hope, Anakin looked afraid. Because hope had limits, and he had no room left for limits. The Republic collapsed slowly, but love collapsed in silence. Their marriage, once a secret joy, became a secret burden. Meetings shortened, embraces stiffened, smiles turned hollow. He still kissed her like she was the only thing left in the galaxy. But it felt like a goodbye more than a welcome. And Padme, for the first time, began to wonder if love could truly save someone who no longer believed he could be saved. The Force moved around them. It whispered warnings. It cried out in the halls of the temple. But no one heard. Because the Jedi were at war, and the Chosen One had begun to look elsewhere for peace. Love was never the weakness, but the fear of losing it. That was the shadow, and it had already begun to swallow him whole. It began the same way every time. A sky without stars, wind moving like breath through dead trees, and her voice faint, distant, cracking through the dark. Anakin, help me. He would wake up gasping, the sheets twisted, his hands trembling. The temple walls felt too quiet, the night too still, and though the dreams ended with his eyes open, the pain did not. He didn't tell the council. He didn't meditate. He didn't let go, because he knew what the dreams meant. He had seen this before. The last time the Force had shown him death, it was his mother, Shmi Skywalker, bound in darkness, her body broken, her breath slipping away. And it had been real. He had felt it in his bones before it ever happened. And when he ignored it, he had arrived too late. Anakin never spoke of the guilt to Obi-Wan. Not after all these years. But it never left him. He had killed for her. Not in battle. Not in justice. He had killed in rage. In grief. In helplessness. He had buried it beneath silence. And the Jedi never asked. But the Force remembered. And it remembered him. Now the dreams had returned. Not of his mother, but of Padme. In pain. Dying. Alone. He saw her lying on a slab, cold and still. He saw his hands reaching but failing. He heard her scream, echoing into nothing. And the worst part was not the death. It was the helplessness. The same helplessness he had vowed to never feel again. He began to watch her more closely. Study the lines of her face. The way she breathed. The way her hands rested on her stomach now that she was pregnant. He didn't smile the way he used to. Didn't laugh. Didn't speak of the future. Because every time he looked at her, he saw time running out. And she knew. She saw the shadows creeping in behind his eyes. The way he flinched when she winced. The way he stared too long, like trying to memorize her before she disappeared. Padme tried to comfort him. "I'm strong," she whispered one night. "You've seen me fight. I'm not going anywhere." But he said nothing, because the dreams did not care how strong she was. The Force had never lied to him. Not about his mother. Not about war. Not about death. And now it whispered again, low, soft, final. The temple offered no guidance. Only rules. Only mantras. Only reminders that fear was the path to darkness. But Anakin no longer feared the dark. He feared loss. And that was something the Jedi refused to understand. He began visiting the archives at night. Not for missions. Not for training. For answers. Legends. Prophecies. Whispers of power long buried. And through it all, the same question beat inside him. If the Force could show death, why couldn't it stop it? He started to listen more closely to Chancellor Palpatine. They met alone, in shadowed corridors, in quiet balconies above the Senate. The Chancellor spoke of ancient Sith who had once manipulated life and death, of Plagueis the Wise, of powers the Jedi feared but never mastered. Anakin never questioned the stories, because he didn't care if they were true. He only cared if they could help her. Because Padme was not just his wife. She was the last piece of the world he believed in. And if the dreams were right, if the Force meant to take her, then the Jedi would not stop it. But he would. Even if it meant breaking everything else. He remembered the smell before the sight. Smoke, iron, burnt leather. The Tusken camp lay beneath a cliff, lit by dying fires. Shadows moved between the tense creatures of sand and blood. Anakin's heart was steady, but his breath was not. He had tracked them alone across the desert, guided only by the Force and a memory that refused to fade. His mother's voice still lingered in the wind. It led him here. Each step felt like falling deeper into something he couldn't name. The Force whispered, not to stop him but to warn him that once he crossed this threshold, he would never come back. He went anyway. He found her inside a dark tent. Shmi Skywalker, frail, bound, eyes half open. She looked smaller than he remembered. Her breath came shallow. Her voice cracked when she said his name. Anakin. He knelt beside her, cutting the bonds, lifting her into his arms. Her head rested against his shoulder like it had when he was a boy. He told her everything would be fine, that he was here now, that nothing would happen to her again. But she smiled weakly. "It's beautiful now," she whispered. Then she was gone. The silence after her last breath was not peace. It was pressure. The Force shrank inside him, pulling tight until it snapped. He didn't scream. Not at first. He stood. He looked out at the camp, the creatures that had taken her, and something ancient opened its eyes inside him. The Jedi taught that the Force was balance. But in that moment, the Force was rage. He ignited his lightsaber, and the blue light cut through the dark like a wound in the night. The first raider fell before he knew he had moved. Then another, and another. He felt nothing. No pain, no thought, only motion, only fury. The screams filled the canyon, but they did not slow him. Men, women, even children, it didn't matter. He killed them all. Not out of cruelty, out of loss, out of a grief too deep for reason. When it was done, the camp was quiet again. The fires still burned, flickering against the bodies that surrounded him. His mother's blanket still rested over his arm. Her voice had vanished completely. He stood in the ashes until dawn. The twin suns rose slowly over the Dune Sea, and he watched them with eyes that no longer belonged to a Jedi. He buried her behind the Lars homestead. The others didn't ask what had happened in the desert. They could see it in his face. Obi-Wan never learned the truth. Padme did. When he told her, he didn't confess. He confessed to himself. "I killed them," he said, trembling. "I killed them all. Not just the men, the women, and the children too. They're animals, and I slaughtered them like animals." Padme touched his cheek. She didn't recoil. She only said, "To be angry is to be human." But he knew better. This wasn't anger. It was the dark, and it had already taken root. That night, when he tried to sleep, the dream changed. His mother wasn't calling anymore. It was Padme now, her voice breaking through the same wind, her cry swallowed by the same silence. And Anakin understood. The Force hadn't shown him his mother's death to warn him. It had shown him his weakness. And soon, it would show him the same loss again. Only next time, he wouldn't let it happen. Not again. The Jedi Temple did not know what to do with grief. They spoke of detachment like it was healing, of serenity like it was truth. But when Anakin Skywalker walked its halls after his mother's death, the silence felt heavier than any comfort they offered. He didn't speak of what happened. He didn't explain what he had done. No one asked. And so the darkness he carried went unnoticed. But it did not go unfelt. Yoda watched him from a distance now. Windu's gaze lingered too long. Even Obi-Wan, once quick to laugh, spoke with more caution. They sensed the change. They just didn't understand it. Anakin had returned from Tatooine with a scar that no lightsaber had left. He spoke less, smiled rarely, and when he looked into the Force, it no longer felt like light. He thought often of his mother, of her quiet voice, of how she had let him go even knowing she would die without him. And in his heart, guilt grew like roots in stone. He had promised to free her, promised to return, promised to be powerful enough to protect those he loved. He had failed. And if the Force truly guided all things, then why had it allowed this? Why show him visions if they could not be stopped? Why ask him to feel everything and then forbid him from acting on it? The war became his distraction. Battlefields replaced meditation. Command replaced stillness. Clones followed him without hesitation. They saw what the Jedi could not. A leader unafraid to feel, unafraid to care. But even among soldiers, Anakin was alone. Because every moment of victory came with the memory of what he had lost. Padme tried to hold him together. She knew something had happened on Tatooine. He never told her the full truth. Only fragments, only pain. But she held him anyway. In the quiet of their shared nights, she ran her fingers through his hair and whispered things no one else was allowed to say. "You're not alone. You're not broken. You're more than what they want you to be." And for a time, it helped. He believed her, or tried to. But deep down, a thought began to form. What if the Jedi were wrong about him? What if they had never truly seen who he was? What if the code wasn't built for someone like him? He began to visit the temple less. He stopped attending meditations, stopped asking questions. Instead, he listened to whispers, to stories hidden in the corners of archives, to Palpatine's soft voice painting new truths. The Chancellor spoke of strength, of power to shape fate, not obey it, of the ability to preserve life, not surrender to its end. And Anakin listened, because he was no longer a student, no longer a son. He was a man with no name for what he was becoming. The Jedi still called him the Chosen One, but he began to question what that truly meant. Was he meant to bring balance, or was he being used to maintain their control? He looked around and saw Jedi debating while the galaxy burned. He saw clones dying in droves while the Council sat in silence. He saw rules enforced while compassion was ignored. And in the dark corners of his mind, he wondered, if the Jedi could not protect those he loved, then what good was their code? What good was prophecy? And what if the only way to stop death was to become something they feared? The chamber was dim when he finally confessed, not to the Council, not to Obi-Wan, to himself. The light of the city filtered through narrow windows, drawing lines across his hands. They didn't shake anymore. The anger had cooled into something quieter, a promise that he would never feel powerless again. He thought of his mother, buried beneath twin suns. He thought of Padme, asleep in their apartment, unaware that the same shadow had found her. He had sworn once to protect life, but the Jedi way no longer felt like protection. It felt like waiting for the next death, waiting for the next lesson about letting go. He couldn't let go. Not again. On the battlefield, his power grew. The clones followed him without question. His enemies feared him before they saw his face. He moved through war like a storm contained within human shape. Obi-Wan called it skill. The Council called it destiny. But Anakin knew what it really was. The darkness inside him had learned to obey. Each battle ended the same way: victory, praise, and emptiness. Every life he saved only reminded him of the one he couldn't. The Force whispered through the hum of his saber, not calm, not peace, but temptation. He could almost hear a voice beneath it, something ancient and patient, waiting for him to answer. He began to use that strength more freely, to push harder, to strike first. When others hesitated, he didn't. When others doubted, he acted. And the line between justice and vengeance blurred, as it always does when the heart leads the hand. The Council noticed but said nothing. They needed him. The Republic needed him. The people needed their hero. And heroes are not questioned when the galaxy is burning. So they turned a blind eye to his rage as long as it served them. Only Obi-Wan tried to reach him. One evening after a mission, as their ship drifted above Cato Moidia, he said softly, "You're a good man, Anakin. Don't forget that." Anakin smiled back, but the words felt foreign. Goodness was a memory. Duty was all that remained. He looked out at the stars and felt the same ache he'd felt as a child, that longing to be free, to do something more than obey. But freedom now had a different meaning. It meant power. It meant control. It meant never watching someone die in his arms again. In dreams, the sand returned. He stood in the Tusken camp once more. His mother's voice faded, and Padme's took its place. Her cry became the wind. Her face became the night. And when he woke, his hands still clenched as if around an invisible throat. The Force tried to warn him, but he had stopped listening. It spoke in visions, and he saw only cruelty in them. What kind of balance demanded so much pain? What kind of peace was built on surrender? He told himself the Jedi feared loss because they were too weak to stop it. He told himself that mercy was hypocrisy, that his love was stronger than their faith. And somewhere between those lies, a truth began to form. He was not meant to serve. He was meant to change everything. He stood one night before the temple's grand window, the city below stretching endless and cold. The air smelled of metal and rain. His reflection stared back robes of a Jedi, eyes of something else. He whispered into the dark, "I won't lose her. I won't lose anyone again." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. The Force heard them. And in the stillness that followed, something inside him shifted. Not a fall, not yet, but the first step down a path that would never let him turn back. A son without a father, a savior without peace. Anakin Skywalker had begun to die, and Darth Vader had begun to dream. He had expected pride. When the message came, when Obi-Wan stood before him and said the words, "You are to be appointed to the Jedi Council," Anakin felt something shift. Not joy, not relief. Just a long exhale, like something he had earned was finally being acknowledged. He stood straighter, he walked slower. He told himself this was what trust looked like. But when he entered the council chamber, the warmth he imagined was not there. No one smiled. No one welcomed him. They nodded, they looked, they moved on. And then came the words that cut deeper than any Sith blade. "You are on this council, but we do not grant you the rank of master." Anakin blinked. For a moment, he thought he had misheard. But the silence afterward confirmed it. They had given him a place, but not the respect. He looked at Mace Windu, trying to understand. Why? Windu's tone didn't waver. "This decision is final." Obi-Wan said nothing. His eyes flickered, a small apology that never reached his lips. Anakin sat down because he had no choice. But in that moment, something inside him changed. This wasn't humility. This was humiliation. He had fought in more battles than half the council. He had saved Obi-Wan's life more times than he could count. He had led troops across the galaxy and returned with victory again and again. But to them, he was still a boy from the sand. Still the outsider. Still the risk. The meeting continued. Missions were discussed. Systems debated. But Anakin heard none of it. His thoughts spun beneath his calm expression. They feared him. He had always known it, but now, they didn't even try to hide it. He had done everything they asked. He had followed the code. He had bled for them. And they still didn't trust him. After the meeting, Obi-Wan pulled him aside. Tried to explain. Tried to soothe. "You know it's about politics," he said. "You're the Chancellor's closest ally. They're being careful." Anakin didn't answer. Obi-Wan hesitated, then added something else, something that turned the wound deeper. "They want you to report on Palpatine. That's why you're really here." The air left Anakin's lungs. He wasn't being honored. He was being used. The council didn't bring him in because they believed in him. They brought him in because they didn't trust the Chancellor, and they needed someone close. Someone disposable. He looked at Obi-Wan and said the words he didn't want to say. "Why are you asking me to do this?" Obi-Wan paused. "Because the council is asking." It was the kind of answer the Jedi always gave. Wrapped in duty, stripped of care. Anakin nodded. But inside, The silence stretched like a crack through stone. He had believed the Order was his family, that they would raise him, trust him, shape him. But now he saw what he truly was to them. A weapon, sharpened by war, controlled by rules, never embraced. When he returned to Padme that evening, she asked how the day had gone. He told her it was fine. She looked at him with the same concern she always had, but didn't press. And as he held her that night, eyes open in the dark, he realized something painful and final. The Jedi had never truly accepted him. And the only person who ever had was now the one the Jedi wanted him to betray. The council chamber was built in silence. Its windows faced the skyline, but its walls held no warmth. Anakin sat among the masters, but every time he spoke, he could feel their eyes narrow. Every word was measured, every opinion judged. He had a seat, but not a voice. They listened when he reported. They nodded when he obeyed. But the moment he questioned, the atmosphere shifted. He was too young, too emotional, too close to the Chancellor. They never said it directly. They didn't have to. He wasn't one of them. Not truly. Not ever. He watched as they planned battles and debated morality. He heard them question orders, question people, but never question themselves. To them, the war was strategy. To him, it was sacrifice. Every decision cost lives, and still, they spoke as if victory was theory, not blood. When he raised concerns, they told him to trust the Force. When he asked questions, they told him to be patient. But patience didn't stop death, and the Force had never saved his mother. Anakin began to speak less. He learned when to sit still, when to stay quiet. But the silence only deepened the bitterness. The longer he remained at that table, the more he understood. This seat was not a gift. It was a leash. Outside the chamber, rumors whispered through the halls. Some Padawans feared him, some admired him, but all agreed on one thing: he was different. He had always been different. His victories were too clean, his instincts too sharp, his connection to the Force too natural. Even the temple's oldest archives couldn't explain it. Some said he was the prophecy made flesh. Others said he was a mistake. No one said it to his face, but he could feel it, the way Jedi feel a storm before it comes. He was the center of a story that none of them understood, and most of them feared. He began to spend more time away from the temple. Missions, briefings, war councils, and when he returned, he went straight to her. Padme was his calm, his gravity. But even with her, something had changed. He didn't speak of the council anymore, didn't share his anger, didn't ask for advice. Because what could she say? That he should be patient, that the Jedi would come around. She didn't know what it felt like to be surrounded by 1,000 Jedi and still be completely alone. He visited the Chancellor more often. Palpatine didn't ask questions the way the Council did. He didn't lecture, didn't quote the code. He listened. He nodded. He offered understanding where the Order offered suspicion. Soon, the Chancellor said one evening, "You will have power enough to do what the Jedi never could." Anakin said nothing, but inside, the words struck like truth, because deep down, he no longer believed the Jedi could fix what was broken. They sat in a circle, preaching peace, while children died in war. They held to tradition while the Republic crumbled beneath them. They asked him to spy, to betray, and then wondered why he hesitated. The Council still called him chosen, still sent him to fight, still praised him for his skill, but never his heart, never his grief, never the things that made him human. They gave him a seat, but no trust, no rank, no future beyond the one they controlled. And with every passing day, the distance between them grew, until one day he stopped seeing them as guides and started seeing them as chains. It began with a name, Darth Plagueis, spoken softly in a chamber of stone and silence, beneath the golden light of Coruscant's highest tower. The Chancellor didn't speak of it like a legend. He spoke like a witness, someone who had heard the story too closely to forget. A Sith Lord so powerful, Palpatine said, he could keep the ones he cared about from dying. Anakin said nothing, but the words stayed with him like a heartbeat behind glass. They had spoken before of death, of fear, of power, but this was different. This was no parable. This was an answer. And in that answer, a temptation. Palpatine watched him carefully, never pressing, never demanding, only offering. Where the Jedi imposed silence, the Chancellor gave space. Where the Jedi judged his emotion, Palpatine honored it. He called Anakin wise beyond his years. He praised his instincts. He reminded him, again and again, that the Jedi feared his potential. And when Anakin hesitated, when doubt crept in, the Chancellor leaned in closer. "They don't understand you, my boy, but I do." At first, Anakin resisted. Not with words, with restraint. He told himself the stories were only that he could listen and still remain loyal. But loyalty had become a knot. To the Council, he was a spy. To the Chancellor, a confidant. To Padme, a husband hiding truths he couldn't explain. And to himself, a man unraveling beneath too many masks. The war was ending, but peace felt further than ever. Grievous was hunted. The Separatists were crumbling. But in Anakin's mind, the real battle had already begun, not in the outer rim, but in the space between trust and betrayal. He had done everything asked of him, fought in every campaign, saved lives, served honorably. But now, both sides whispered behind his back. The Council did not believe in him. The Chancellor did not need to ask, he already knew. Anakin began to wonder which betrayal would come first. The one he committed, or the one committed against him. One evening, high above the Senate, the Chancellor spoke plainly. "The Jedi are plotting to take control of the Republic," he said. "They've asked you to betray me, but I have never asked you for anything." Anakin stood in silence, heart pounding. He wanted to deny it, wanted to walk away, but he knew it was true. And so did Palpatine. Then came the final truth, not wrapped in riddles, not softened by lies. "I am the Sith Lord the Jedi seek." The words landed without warning, like a stone into water. Anakin's mind reeled. Everything inside him screamed. But beneath that scream was a quiet voice. Not fear, not hate. Hope. Because if it was true, then the power to save Padme was within reach. He stepped back, threatened, argued, but he didn't act. Not yet. Because this wasn't war. This wasn't duty. This was personal. This was the only chance he had left. He ran to the Council, told them what he had learned. Watched them listen, hesitate, dismiss. They didn't include him in the arrest. They didn't trust him to help. And in that final moment of rejection, something inside Anakin broke. He had been loyal, and they left him behind. Palpatine had been honest, and now he was alone. The decision was not yet made, but the weight of it pressed down like gravity. And for the first time, Anakin wondered if saving Padme might require letting go of everything else. Even the Jedi, even himself. When the doors closed behind Mace Windu and his soldiers, Anakin stood in the council chamber alone. The light outside was fading a pale gold, slipping into gray. He could feel the galaxy narrowing around him. Everything he had ever trusted was at war within him now. The council had ordered him to stay behind, to wait, to obey. But waiting was what had killed his mother. Waiting was what haunted his dreams. And waiting now would mean losing Padme. He looked toward the temple spires, each one a monument to restraint. They had told him fear was the path to the dark side. But it wasn't fear that consumed him now. It was love and the silence of those who never understood it. He could sense Palpatine's presence even from across the city. The darkness was calling to him, not in words, in promise. The Force trembled inside him, torn between duty and desperation. Every lesson, every code, every commandment, all of it bent beneath a single truth. If he let Windu kill the Chancellor, he would lose the only hope he had left to save her. He tried to meditate, but the silence offered no peace. Only echoes. Only questions. Would the Jedi mourn him if he fell? Would they even notice? Or would they simply replace him as they had so many before? He stood, because he could not sit still any longer. The decision was already made, even if he didn't yet know it. When he reached the Senate Tower, the wind howled against the glass. Lightning lit the city in white flashes. Inside, chaos. Mace Windu stood over Palpatine, saber raised, voice cold with finality. Palpatine's pleas filled the chamber. "I am too weak. The Jedi are taking over." Anakin froze. Everything blurred. The Force screamed around him, two currents pulling in opposite directions. Light, dark, and he stood at the center, breaking apart. Windu's blade glowed inches from Palpatine's throat. Anakin begged him to stop, to arrest him, to let him stand trial. But Windu's eyes were hard. "He's too dangerous to be kept alive." And in those words, Anakin heard the final truth. They weren't saviors. They were executioners. The same cold certainty he had heard when they refused to make him a master. The same distrust that had poisoned every look, every word. The same silence that had met his cries for help. Something inside him snapped. He moved without thinking. The saber flashed. Windu fell. The storm outside roared like the galaxy itself had taken a breath. When it ended, Palpatine rose. Lightning scarred the air, and Anakin, trembling, silent, broken, dropped to his knees. "What have I done?" Palpatine's voice was calm, almost gentle. "You are fulfilling your destiny." The Chancellor, the Sith Lord, placed a hand on his shoulder. "I will help you save her, but you must learn to use the dark side." Anakin closed his eyes. The words should have disgusted him, but they didn't. They sounded like mercy. He whispered, "I will do whatever you ask." And in that moment, the last light of the Jedi Knight faded. Not with rage, not with triumph, but with grief. When the storm cleared, the sun had gone. And so had he. The boy from the sand, the student, the friend. All that remained was the wound he left behind, carved by silence, sealed by fear. The Jedi had given him a seat, but never a place to belong. And now, the only master he would ever obey again was the one who had finally listened. He stood at the edge of everything he had been. The Chancellor's office was quiet now. No guards, no advisors. Just the two of them, Anakin Skywalker and Darth Sidious. The air smelled of ash and ozone. Lightning still clung to the walls from the battle that had just ended. Mace Windu was dead. And so was the last reason to believe the Jedi would ever understand him. Anakin didn't speak at first. He stared at his hands. They had just killed a Jedi Master. They had chosen. Palpatine's voice was soft, almost fatherly. He didn't gloat. He didn't celebrate. He offered only one thing. Become my apprentice. Learn to use the dark side of the Force. Together, we can discover the secret to saving Padme. Anakin said nothing, but the silence spoke for him. He would not walk away. Not now. He sank to his knees, not as a gesture of defeat but of desperation. I will do whatever you ask, just help me save her. It was not a demand. It was a vow. The Sith Lord placed a hand on his shoulder. Then you shall be known as Darth Vader. There was no flash of thunder, no burst of power, just a name placed like a stone on top of a grave. Anakin Skywalker didn't die in that moment. Not all at once. But something cracked, a wall inside him that had held the darkness back. And now, it began to fall. The first command came quickly. The Jedi are traitors. The Republic belongs to us now. Go to the temple. Do what must be done. Anakin stood. His face did not flinch. His heart did not tremble. The man who had once wept for strangers, the boy who had once dreamed of freeing slaves, was now ablaze with one purpose. He left the Chancellor's office without a word. Outside, the war still raged. But inside, the real war had already been lost. The clones greeted him with respect. They didn't question the shift in his voice. They didn't question the soldiers that followed. The 501st loyal, disciplined, unflinching. They followed him to the temple without hesitation. No banners, no trumpets, no honor, just footsteps in the dark, echoing off ancient stone. The temple doors opened like a wound. The guards at the gate moved to speak, but never got the chance. Anakin's blade was already ignited, blue still. For now, there were no words, no warnings, only death. Jedi Masters, Knights, Padawans, even the younglings. He moved through them like shadow, swift, precise, merciless. Not because he hated them, but because he believed they would destroy everything he loved. They would not let him save her, so he would not let them live. As the halls filled with smoke, as bodies fell to the floor, the Force recoiled. A place once built on peace now drowned in silence. Lightsabers clashed, blasters echoed. And still he walked, steady, silent. The Jedi had raised him, taught him, feared him. And now, he was what they had always said he would become. Not because he desired it, but because they left him no other path. He did not fall. He chose. The temple had always been a place of light. Its walls echoed with the footsteps of generations. Its halls had raised thousands. Here, children once whispered lessons to each other. Here, peace was taught as if it could last forever. But now, that peace was dying. It began in silence. The guards at the main gates never sounded the alarm. By the time the rest of the Jedi felt it through the Force, the shadows were already inside. Darth Vader walked through stone corridors like he had never left them. He knew every passage, every corner, every name carved into the memorial walls. And yet, none of it stopped his hand. The younglings ran to him first. They were afraid. Not of him, not yet. "Master Skywalker," one of them said, "there are too many of them. What are we going to do?" He looked down at the boy. There was a pause, a breath, a moment where the past could have returned. But it didn't. His lightsaber ignited, and history died with them. Elsewhere in the temple, chaos spread like fire. Masters leapt into battle. Some died before their sabers left their belts. Others fought with fury, defending the archives, the young, the sacred texts. They didn't know what had come for them. Not at first. They believed it was betrayal from outside. They couldn't imagine it had come from within. Not him. Not the boy they raised. Not the one who smiled in the gardens. Not the Padawan who once said he wanted to stop slavery, to save everyone, to be good. But it was. And by the time they realized, it was too late. He moved through the library, through the meditation halls, through the archives, where he once studied, where he once played, where he once dreamed. Now the dreams were gone. Now there was only purpose. He fought without words, without sound, only breath and fire and death. Up in the High Council chamber, he stood alone. The same room where they had once denied him. The same room where they had once told him he wasn't ready, that he didn't belong, that he wasn't trusted. He stared at the chairs, 12 of them, empty now, symbols of power disguised as peace. He thought of Yoda, of Mace, of Obi-Wan. He thought of all the voices that told him to let go, to surrender his fear, to silence his heart. But the heart they told him to silence, that was the reason he was here. Not to destroy the Jedi, to save her. Outside, smoke began to rise. Clones swarmed through lower levels. Blasters fired through sacred halls. But within him, there was stillness. This was not rage, not vengeance. This was inevitability. He had become the only thing left strong enough to change fate. And if the cost was everything else, so be it. The sun began to rise over Coruscant, and in its first light, the temple still stood, but the light inside it was already gone. Across the stars, it happened all at once. No speech, no warning, just a single transmission, coded, precise, unmistakable. Execute Order 66. The words echoed through secure comms in every theater of the war. From the jungles of Felucia to the snows of Megiddo. From the oceans of Kamino to the towers of Cato, Neimoidia. And one by one, the clones obeyed. Jedi turned to speak, only to be met with blaster fire. Friends became enemies. Comrades became executioners. There was no hesitation. Aayla Secura walked through the trees, her men behind her. Loyal, trusted. They didn't shout. They didn't curse. They just raised their rifles and fired. Plo Koon flew above Cato Neimoidia. His starfighter danced through the clouds. The clones behind him received the order, and within seconds, he was gone. Ki-Adi Mundi led a charge through the mountains. He turned, blade ready, expecting his men to follow. They did, only not with him at him. Across the galaxy, Jedi fell. Not to Sith, not to armies, to the ones they had protected, to the soldiers they had fought beside. It wasn't just betrayal. It was design. Years of planning hidden beneath war. One command, and the Republic became an empire. And the Jedi became extinct. Not all fell. Some sensed it a moment before the shots were fired. Reflexes, not thought. They leapt. They ran. They disappeared. But even the survivors knew. They were no longer defenders. They were fugitives. The war hadn't ended. It had turned. And behind it all, a single mind watched it unfold. Darth Sidious, Chancellor, Sith Lord, Emperor, smiled in the dark. Obi-Wan Kenobi had no warning. He rode through the cliffs of Utapau on the back of a Varactile. Tired, focused, unaware. Commander Cody, once his friend, received the order. No tremble in his voice. No second thought. He aimed a cannon and fired. Obi-Wan fell into the abyss. But the Force wasn't done with him. Not yet. Yoda stopped walking mid-step. His hand clutched his chest. Pain, death, silence. 1,000 cries, and then nothing. He turned. His clones raised their rifles. He didn't flinch. Their bodies hit the ground before they ever fired. Back on Coruscant, the city continued without pause. Traffic moved. People laughed. The sun rose. But in the shadows, temples burned, and trust vanished from the galaxy like smoke in wind. Anakin stood atop the temple steps. The sky behind him was on fire. The clones marched around him like shadows in armor. He didn't speak. He didn't weep. He didn't wonder if it was right. Because for the first time in his life, he felt no doubt. The Jedi were gone. The Sith had returned. And he had chosen this. Not to conquer, to save, but what he didn't know, what the dark side never told him, was that every act done in fear only creates more loss. He thought he had ended the war. He thought he had ensured her safety. But the future was already breaking. And the thing he had feared most was still waiting to happen. The fires burned all night. Smoke rose from the temple like a funeral pyre that could be seen from orbit. The stars above Coruscant disappeared behind the haze. Inside, the last of the Jedi were dying, and the man who had once sworn to protect them walked among the flames, his blue blade reflected in every fallen eye. He told himself it was mercy, that every life taken tonight was saving another hers. He whispered her name beneath his breath as if it could justify the silence. Padme. When he returned to the Senate Tower, the city was still. The Chancellor waited, his robes dark, his face hidden beneath the flicker of emergency lights. "It is done," Anakin said. Palpatine smiled, slowly, deliberately. "Very good, my apprentice. The Republic will be reorganized into the First Galactic Empire." The words sounded distant, political, empty. Anakin wasn't listening. His hands still smelled of smoke. His mind still replayed the cries of the ones he'd killed. Palpatine turned to him. "You have brought peace." Anakin looked out the window at the burning temple, at the city suffocating beneath its own lights, and said quietly, "Yes, peace." But even as he said it, he felt it the first ghost of what he had become. He went to her. Padme was waiting at her apartment, the air filled with unease. The sky outside was orange. He entered without speaking, his eyes hollow, his voice low. "They tried to overthrow the Republic," he said. "The Jedi have betrayed us, but I have saved them." She looked at him, confused, afraid. "Saved who, Anakin?" "Us." Her hand trembled against her stomach. "What are you saying?" He took her by the shoulders. "I did it for you, for our child. We can rule together, make things the way we want them to be." Tears formed in her eyes. "You're breaking my heart." But he couldn't stop. The fear had turned to obsession, and the obsession had become faith. "You don't understand," he whispered. "I saw you die. I won't let that happen. Not again." When she left to find him on Mustafar, she still believed there was hope, that the boy from the sand could be reached, that love could still undo the darkness. But when she arrived, there was no boy left. The fires of the planet mirrored the ones inside him. The Republic was dead, the Jedi were gone, and her husband, the man she loved, stood waiting in black, eyes like molten gold. He spoke of peace, of order, of destiny. She spoke his name. He told her she was with him or against him. And when Obi-Wan stepped from her ship, the last light in Anakin's eyes went out. He thought she had betrayed him. He thought the dream had come true. And the same fear that had driven him to the dark now turned him fully into it. He struck. Not at her, not yet, but at the man who had once called him brother. When it was over, Anakin Skywalker lay burning on the shores of Mustafar. His screams echoed into the smoke, his skin turned to ash, his limbs were gone. And as he gasped his final breath as a man, she gave hers in childbirth, naming the twins he would never know. Luke, Leia. She died, whispering his name. He lived forgetting it. The galaxy mourned them both, one as a fallen hero, the other as a broken dream. Anakin Skywalker was gone, and in his place, something colder breathed for the first time. Darth Vader. The galaxy believed he died on Mustafar, burned alive, betrayed, consumed by the fires of a world too cruel for mercy. But he didn't die. He was kept alive. Not by choice, not by will, but by design. The man who woke up on the operating table wasn't Anakin Skywalker. Not anymore. He didn't know his name. He didn't know where he was. He only remembered pain. And then, he remembered her. The med droids worked in silence. The Emperor stood watching, arms folded behind his back. A machine stitched limbs where limbs had been lost. Synthetic skin wrapped around ruined flesh. Iron replaced muscle. Plastic replaced breath. The mask was lowered last. The eyes opened, and for the first time, Darth Vader breathed. The first sound wasn't a scream. It was a machine. A low, mechanical rasp that filled the sterile chamber like thunder sealed in metal. The sound would follow him for the rest of his life. Every breath, a reminder. Every breath, a prison. He tried to speak. The words cracked through the vocoder. He asked about her. The only one he had done this for. The only reason he had chosen this fate. Padme. Palpatine turned to him with a calm voice that didn't match the weight of the sentence. "It seems, in your anger, you killed her." Something inside the suit shattered. The droids did not see it. The Emperor smiled, just barely. The body rose unsteady, incomplete, and let out a sound that was not human. It was rage. It was mourning. It was the soul of Anakin Skywalker, been crushed under its own guilt. He had tried to stop her death, and now she was gone. Because of him, the armor was not meant for healing. It was meant for control. It limited his senses, filtered the world through static, muted the force like it was coming through a wall of glass. He couldn't feel warmth. He couldn't cry. He couldn't sleep without remembering how it felt to burn. He was powerful more than ever, but nothing inside him felt real anymore. Only pain, only silence. The palace on Coruscant became his new prison. No sunlight, no visitors, just orders. The Emperor spoke to him now like a tool, not a friend, not a son. The Jedi are gone, he said, but there are others still in hiding. And so, the hunts began. Vader's first steps in armor were not triumphant. They were slow, awkward, each movement a battle against the machine that kept him alive. But soon, he learned how to fight again, how to strike without mercy. And with every life he took in the name of the Empire, he drifted further from the boy who once dreamed of saving people. The Jedi he faced in those early days saw a monster. They didn't know it was him. They didn't see the scars beneath the mask. They didn't hear the voice that cried out when no one else was listening. He killed them anyway, because the Emperor ordered it, because it was the only thing left he was good at. Because if he stopped, even for a moment, he might have remembered her again. And remembering her hurt more than the fire ever did. He visited her grave once, secretly, late at night, alone, when no one was watching. He didn't speak. He didn't kneel. He just stood there, a black silhouette in the wind. The wind didn't move him. The name carved in stone didn't reach him. And yet, he stayed for hours. Because even monsters need to mourn. The man who rose from Mustafar was no longer Anakin Skywalker. But something of him remained, buried deep beneath armor, beneath hate, beneath the voice that was no longer his own. Not a memory, not a hope, just a shadow, waiting for what he did not know. Only that the pain had not ended. And that, even in victory, he had lost everything. Vader's body survived. His spirit did not. The armor was built to keep him alive, but also to remind him he shouldn't be. Every breath cost him pain. Every movement, resistance. He could feel the weight of every wire, every piston, every pulse of electricity that kept his broken heart beating. The Emperor called it his salvation. But Vader understood what it really was. A cage disguised as strength. The mask gave him power but stole his humanity. It took his voice, his touch, his warmth. When he reached out through the Force, it was no longer gentle. It was violent. It tore instead of healed. It crushed instead of held. Even the Force had begun to sound different. Where once it sang, it now screamed. He lived in silence. No laughter, no music, no sun. The fortress on Mustafar became his refuge and his punishment. The same planet that burned him alive now housed his throne. Black towers rose over rivers of lava, his reflection in architecture. The sound of molten fire echoed in the halls like memory. The droids that served him spoke in binary and fear. They bowed low. They did not look him in the eyes. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, he would order them to leave. He would sit alone, listening to the mechanical rhythm of his own breathing. It was constant, unchanging, unending. He wondered, sometimes, if that sound would ever stop, if the galaxy would ever fall silent again, if peace would mean death and whether he would welcome it. The Emperor visited rarely. When he did, it was only to test his loyalty. Sidious spoke of rebuilding the Empire, of crushing what remained of the Jedi, of power, endless, unbroken power. Vader nodded, obeyed, executed orders without question. But inside, he felt nothing. He didn't crave dominance. He didn't crave revenge. He only craved quiet. But quiet never came. Because even in his isolation, he heard her. Sometimes in dreams, sometimes in the static between breaths. Anakin. It was never clear if it was memory or madness. He didn't care. It was the only voice that could still reach him. And every time he heard it, the machine inside him trembled, as if the armor itself remembered her name. He trained alone. He meditated, though it no longer felt like peace. He rebuilt his connection to the Force through pain, through control. The light was gone, but the Force remained. It had not abandoned him. It had simply changed its shape. He learned to draw power from anger, from fear, from memory. The very emotions the Jedi told him to bury now became his strength. And in time, that strength became legend. To the galaxy, he was myth. A phantom in black who appeared from nowhere and destroyed everything in his path. A shadow of the Emperor's will. A punishment made flesh. People whispered his name like a curse. Vader. They didn't know he once had another. They didn't know he had ever smiled. They didn't know that beneath the armor, there was still a heartbeat, slow, heavy, unwilling. Once, an Imperial officer dared to ask if he still felt pain. Vader said nothing. But later, when the man failed him, Vader showed him the answer. Pain had become his companion, his proof that he was still alive, his only connection to what he once was. When the rage ended, the silence returned heavier than before. And in that silence, he began to realize something worse than death. He wasn't trapped inside the armor. He was the armor. The man within had become the machine. The heartbeat had become the hiss of the respirator. The voice had become static and fear. And whatever remained of Anakin Skywalker was now only a ghost drifting inside metal lungs. Vader did not ask why. He was given targets. He eliminated them. He was sent to systems. They surrendered. When they didn't, they burned. He was not a general. He was not a diplomat. He was not a man. He was the Emperor's fist. The first to strike. The last to leave. The one who reminded the galaxy that resistance was not noble, it was fatal. His ship emerged from hyperspace like an omen. His breath echoed before he ever spoke. Entire worlds surrendered to silence when they learned he was coming. He didn't need armies. He didn't need approval. He didn't need names. He needed only one thing: obedience. The Jedi who survived the purge went into hiding. Some hid in deserts. Some hid in temples. Some tried to forget the Force. But the Force did not forget them. And neither did Vader. His inquisitors hunted them like prey. But when they failed, and they often failed, he came himself. He tracked them through shadows, listened to the echoes of their fear. And when he found them, he did not offer mercy. He offered truth. There is no peace. There is no balance. There is only the Emperor. They begged. They fought. Some even tried to remind him of who he was. Anakin, don't. And then they died, because they said the one name he could never forgive. The Emperor watched everything. Every mission, every duel, every failure, every triumph. He saw the anger inside his apprentice. He saw the sorrow, too. He fed both. He reminded Vader, again and again, that the Jedi betrayed him, that Padme would have died anyway, that the pain was a lesson, not a punishment. Vader listened, but deep down, he knew the truth. The Emperor did not save him. He broke him, then rebuilt him into something that couldn't disobey. And so, Vader obeyed, because it was all he had left. He was sent to the Outer Rim, to mining colonies, rebellion strongholds, forgotten ruins. He fought Wookiees on Kashyyyk. He crushed uprisings on Ryloth. He tore through cell after cell of resistance, never asking who they were, never wondering why they fought. The armor did not allow questions, only orders, and the people, the ones he once swore to protect, now saw him as death-given form. Fathers told stories of him to frighten their children. Commanders whispered his title over encrypted comms like a death sentence. The Jedi called him fallen, but none of them knew what he had really become. Not fallen, not lost, just gone. Once, on a lonely world in the Mid-Rim, he found a boy with Force sensitivity. The child hid in a cave, trembling, his mother dead beside him, slain by stormtroopers who didn't understand what she was trying to protect. Vader entered the cave alone. The boy didn't run, didn't cry. He looked up at the dark figure, the black mask, the humming lightsaber, and he asked the one question Vader had not heard in years. "Are you here to help me?" Vader stared at the boy. The silence stretched long. Then, without a word, he turned and left. The boy lived. No one ever found him again. No one ever knew why. But that cave echoed with something old, something not spoken aloud, a shadow of a man who once wanted to save people. A man buried beneath armor and ash. Vader reported back to the Emperor. Mission complete. No witnesses. No survivors. It was a lie. But Sidious did not question him. He never did. Because what mattered was the war. And in war, tools are not asked why they work, only that they do. He was alone, but not empty. Time had changed him. Years passed like breath cold, mechanical, unnoticed. He didn't age like others did. He endured. His body was more machine than flesh. But somewhere within it, something still remembered how it once felt to be human. He didn't speak of it, didn't think about it for long. But the memories returned anyway, uninvited. Not as visions, not as dreams, but as fragments. A glance, a scent, a sound. He once heard a senator speak in the Grand Convocation Chamber. Her voice trembled when she challenged a new imperial order. She reminded him of Padme. Not her face, not her politics, just her courage. And for 1 second, Vader froze. Then the chamber fell silent, and the memory faded. The past clung to him like the ashes of Mustafar. He walked among the stars, but they no longer brought wonder. He watched sunrises from orbit, but they no longer stirred anything in him. He had buried Anakin Skywalker, But he hadn't forgotten him. Sometimes he would pass through places the boy once walked. Tatooine, Coruscant, Naboo. He never lingered, never returned to her grave. But when the silence grew too loud, he stood near the places they once touched, as if proximity could replace forgiveness. It never did. One mission brought him to a temple, ruins of the old Jedi Order, stone halls long since reclaimed by time and moss. He moved through them quietly, not as a conqueror, but as a shadow. Old carvings lined the walls, Jedi code, images of peacekeepers with lightsabers drawn in defense, not rage. He paused. His own reflection mirrored back in the shattered glass. He saw the armor, but beneath it, just for a moment, he saw the boy again. Dust-covered, hopeful, afraid. The vision broke. The mission resumed, but the silence that followed him out of that temple was different than before. Heavier, more familiar. Palpatine noticed it. He always did. "You dwell too long in the past, my apprentice." Vader did not answer, because in truth, he no longer knew where the past ended and the present began. He had lost so much. Names, faces, meaning. But the loss itself had become his identity. He was not just a Sith Lord. He was the echo of a man who had tried to save everything and failed. The galaxy called him a monster. He did not disagree, because monsters remember what they used to be, and that's what makes them dangerous. Once, he found an old holo recording. Obi-Wan, training younglings, laughing, smiling. He nearly crushed it in his hand. But he didn't. He watched it again and again, until the rage dulled, and something else took its place. Not forgiveness, not sorrow, just stillness. The kind of stillness found in ruins, the kind found after a war has ended, but the battlefield still smells like fire. He walked the halls of the Death Star without sound. Officers saluted. Stormtroopers stood aside. No one asked where he was going. No one ever did. He was a symbol of fear, but he was also a man with nowhere left to go. He had become exactly what the galaxy expected. But somewhere deep inside, behind the voice, behind the scars, behind the darkness, something still remembered her touch, her voice, her tears. He couldn't bring her back, but he couldn't let her go. And so he carried her, in silence, in pain, in everything he destroyed. Not as redemption, not as hope, just memory, a single thread of light, woven into the fabric of a shadow. He had forgotten the sound of his own name. Not Vader, the name the galaxy feared, but the other one. The one that belonged to a boy, a brother, a husband. Anakin. It no longer meant anything to him. That's what he told himself. That's what he told the Emperor. But names have a way of surviving, even when everything else burns. And there was one man in the galaxy who still spoke it, still believed it had meaning, still believed it belonged to someone who wasn't a monster. Obi-Wan Kenobi. Vader had not seen him in years, but the memory was never far. Mustafar had ended their bond in fire, and yet it hadn't. He remembered the way Kenobi looked at him that day. Tears in his voice, sorrow in his silence. Not hatred, not fear. That was the wound Vader never healed. Not the burns, not the loss of limbs, but the look, the sound of a heart breaking. "You were my brother." That sentence haunted him more than the screams. When the whispers of Kenobi's survival reached his ears, Vader didn't hesitate. He didn't pause. He ordered the Inquisitors to find him, to chase him, to drag him out of whatever hole he had buried himself in. But deep beneath the commands, beneath the mission, there was something else. Something colder, something quieter. He needed to see him again, to end what was left. Because as long as Obi-Wan lived, Anakin wasn't truly dead. And Vader couldn't stand the sound of his name echoing in someone else's voice. He hunted him across the stars, through whispers, through shadows, through fear. The Jedi were gone, but Kenobi had not vanished. He had only hidden. And that meant he still remembered, still held on, still hoped. Vader didn't understand it. Hope was a weakness. Hope was what Anakin clung to, and hope was what killed him. But even as he repeated these truths, as he buried them in darkness, there was a flicker. Not light, not redemption, just something unspoken. A question without form. What if Obi-Wan wasn't wrong? He pushed the thought away, like he always did. He drowned it in rage. He smothered it in orders. He buried it in the armor. But it always came back, because the galaxy had many ghosts, and not all of them stayed dead. He saw Kenobi again on a distant world. Not a battlefield, not a temple, just empty rock and wind. The kind of place where endings happen. Obi-Wan looked older, weaker, tired, but Vader knew better, because the Jedi Master still stood tall, still held a lightsaber, still looked at him like there was something left to save. It made him furious, because in that moment, Vader wasn't sure if he wanted to kill Obi-Wan or be proven wrong by him. He spoke first. "I am what you made me." He didn't know why he said it. He had rehearsed other lines, darker ones, final ones, but that was the truth, wasn't it? He needed someone to blame. And if he couldn't blame himself, he would blame the one who left him burning. Obi-Wan didn't answer. He only looked at him, the same way he did on Mustafar, like he still saw him, like he still cared, like he still believed. It made everything worse. The lightsabers ignited, but the real battle had started long before. This wasn't just a duel. This was grief. This was guilt. This was memory given shape. They fought not just with blades, but with everything they hadn't said. Every failure, every scar, every name unspoken. And as they moved, as sparks lit the shadows, Vader felt something crack. Not in the armor, but in the silence. Because for the first time in years, he wasn't fighting a Jedi. He was fighting Obi-Wan, the one person who had once believed Anakin Skywalker was worth saving. The wind howled across the broken ground. Their lightsabers screamed in contrast, a deep red against a tired blue. But this was not about the Force. This was not about victory. This was about grief and rage, and the aching truth neither of them wanted to speak. Vader pressed forward like a storm. Obi-Wan gave ground like a shadow. The tempo wasn't strategy. It was memory. a rhythm of pain both men knew too well. Every strike was a question, every block a denial, every step a retreat from something neither could escape. He had dreamed of this moment. Vader had imagined it in fire. He would crush the Jedi who left him to die. He would make Obi-Wan pay for believing he could be saved. But now that they were here, it wasn't enough. Obi-Wan didn't hate him. He should have. He should have looked at Vader and seen nothing but a monster. But he didn't. And that made the rage feel hollow. Because hate only works when the other person stops loving you. Obi-Wan stumbled. Vader pressed in, their sabers locked with a sound like thunder. He could feel the Jedi's strength fading, but not his resolve. And that was the unbearable part. Anakin Skywalker had vanished into a suit of armor. But Obi-Wan still stood as if the boy wasn't gone. As if some part of him could still be reached. As if the battle wasn't already lost. You've become everything you swore to destroy. The words weren't shouted. They weren't angry. They were tired. Spoken like a man standing at the grave of someone he once loved. Vader struck harder. But Obi-Wan still moved with purpose. He fought not to kill but to wake something. To force the shadow to remember the light. And that was far more dangerous than any blade. Because, as much as Vader hated it, he could still feel the old bond beneath it all. The training, the trust, the years spent side by side. It echoed in every feint, every maneuver, every moment where they moved in rhythm, as if they still knew each other. And for a flicker of a second, they did. Then came the strike. A perfect counter. A blow Vader didn't see. Obi-Wan shattered the control panel on his chest. The armor sparked. The breathing stuttered. And for the first time in decades, Vader fell to one knee. Pain surged, not from the damage, but from what came next. Obi-Wan stepped back, not to finish him, but to look. The mask had cracked. A piece of his face was visible. And what Obi-Wan saw was not the Sith Lord the galaxy feared. He saw Anakin. Their eyes met, one full of tears, the other full of fire. But the fire trembled, because Anakin Skywalker was not as dead as Vader believed. Anakin. It was a whisper, soft, like a name spoken by a father, to a son he thought he'd lost. But Vader didn't allow the silence to last. You didn't kill Anakin Skywalker. His voice cracked through the modulator, barely more than a breath. I did. He wanted Obi-Wan to hate him, to walk away knowing the boy he raised was gone. He wanted that truth to bury whatever was left. But it didn't. Because Obi-Wan didn't look angry. He looked broken. He turned and walked away. Not in defeat, not in fear, but in mourning. He could have ended it, but he didn't. Because in some way, he still couldn't kill his brother. And Vader watched him leave, frozen, fractured, not by the wound in his suit, but by the one left in his soul. Because he had fought to prove he was no longer Anakin Skywalker. But in the silence that followed, in the shadow of that ruined canyon, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Regret. He returned to the ship in silence. The metal hissed beneath his feet. Alarms blinked, systems stabilized. But inside the armor, nothing was stable. Vader didn't speak. didn't look at the troopers, didn't call the Emperor. He just sat in the dark and listened to the way his breath stuttered through the half-repaired voice box. A reminder that even machines could be broken. And for the first time in years, the rage didn't come. Not fully. It was there, waiting. But it didn't answer him like it used to. Because something else had taken its place. He could still feel the moment. The moment Obi-Wan looked at him. Not like an enemy. Not like a threat. But like a friend watching someone fall from a cliff. And Vader had looked back. That was the worst part. He hadn't turned away. For that heartbeat of silence, he saw himself reflected in Kenobi's eyes. Not the armor. Not the Sith. Not the dark side. Just a man. Alone. Burned. Wrong. He tried to forget. Tried to focus on the mission. On the Empire. The next planet. The next hunt. The next Jedi to kill. But something had cracked. He stared at the mask's inner lens in the dark. He traced the fractures Obi-Wan left in the metal. And he realized that mask had never protected him. It had hidden him from the galaxy, from his enemies, from his pain, and now it had failed because someone had seen through it. And the mask didn't stop him from remembering anymore. He remembered Padme, her voice, her touch, the last time she looked at him with fear. He remembered what he'd done, not just to her, but because of her. He had wanted to stop death, wanted to save her, and in the process, he became its servant. He didn't just lose her. He became the reason she was gone. And the galaxy called him powerful. But what power was left when the one thing he wanted was already buried beneath the dust? The Emperor summoned him. Vader responded. He always did, but Palpatine noticed. He asked if Vader was distracted, if Kenobi had weakened him, if the past still whispered. Vader said no. He always did, but Sidious wasn't fooled. He sent Vader on harder missions, longer hunts, darker work, anything to sharpen the edge again. But every Jedi Vader killed, every rebel base he crushed, every scream that echoed in his presence, none of it silenced what had awakened. Because now, he didn't just hear their fear. He felt something else. Their hope, and hope was dangerous. Not for the Jedi, but for him, because he had built his life on the belief that Anakin Skywalker was dead. That love was a weakness, that the Jedi had betrayed him. But Kenobi's eyes told a different story. So did the silence. So did the way the galaxy still remembered his name. Not Vader. Anakin. It was whispered in resistance halls, scribed on old temple walls, carried by droids, who still spoke of a man who once freed slaves and saved planets. The galaxy hadn't forgotten, and now, neither could he. He stood before the mirror, deep inside his chambers. He removed the mask, piece by piece. Metal hissed, air escaped, the face behind the legend emerged. Scarred, twisted, exposed. But in the reflection, he didn't see Darth Vader. Not fully. He saw a man who had tried to change the galaxy and ended up destroying it. He saw the Jedi who loved too deeply and feared too much. He saw a father who would never meet his children. He saw Anakin Skywalker, and it broke him. He told himself it was over, that the moment had passed, that whatever flickered inside him when Kenobi spoke that name, Anakin, was gone. But the past doesn't vanish. It waits, quiet, patient, just beneath the surface of the breath, of the blade, of the black. And now, every time Vader stood in silence, he heard the echo. He watched the stars pass outside the viewport. The galaxy moved. The Empire expanded. Rebellions were crushed. Systems brought to heel. But the silence inside him grew louder. Because for all the fear he commanded, he felt no peace. Not even satisfaction. He had destroyed the Jedi. And yet, Obi-Wan lived. He had sworn off weakness. And yet, he had hesitated. He had become the Sith Lord he was meant to be. And yet, he was still haunted by a name. Not a title, not a legend. A name whispered once, by a boy born in sand. Anakin. He returned to Mustafar, not for orders, not for conquest, but to remember. The lava still flowed, the heat still pulsed, but the man who burned there was already long dead. Or so he thought. He stood on the same bank where it happened. The air smelled of ash. He could still see the moment if he closed his eyes. Obi-Wan above him. The fire crawling up his limbs. Padme's ship in the distance. His own scream swallowed by flame. But now, years later, there was no scream, no fury, only stillness. And in that stillness, a question. What if he had been wrong? What if the Jedi hadn't betrayed him? What if Padme had never feared him? What if he hadn't turned? What if he hadn't fallen? But the what if was a poison. And Vader knew it. He clenched his fists, metal grinding against metal. He turned from the shore. There was no saving what was lost. Not Padme, not the Jedi, not the Republic, not Skywalker. That man was gone. That's what he told himself. That's what the Emperor believed. That's what the galaxy had accepted. But deep in the Force, something disagreed. It didn't speak. It didn't scream. It whispered. In moments between battles, in dreams he didn't remember. In visions he denied. He saw two children, one with her mother's eyes, one with his own. He saw a future that he could never hold. Not as Vader, not as a monster. He tried to bury it, to drown it. But the Force didn't let him. Because the Force remembered. It remembered who he had been, what he could have become, what still remained, even in shadow. And that was the truth. He couldn't kill. He could destroy Jedi. He could silence the galaxy. He could wear the black mask until no one remembered his face. But he couldn't erase the part of him that had loved, that had believed, that had fallen, not for power, but out of fear. That truth would never die, not fully, because beneath the armor, beneath the scars, beneath the name Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker still lived, trapped, waiting, and the day would come when that name would be spoken again. Not as a memory, not as a ghost, but as a spark. He was not looking for a son. He had forgotten what it meant to be a father, forgotten the child who never lived, the one who died with her, the one he never held. But the galaxy remembered, and the Force remembered. And so did Obi-Wan. Not with words, not with warning, but with a name, Skywalker. It was whispered first in the shadows, a rebel pilot, a survivor of Yavin, the boy who destroyed the Death Star. He had no rank, no army, just a name. But it was a name Vader knew could not exist. Skywalker. The name was supposed to have burned with him. The man who carried it had died in fire. Vader had made sure of that, had killed him with his own hands. That was what he told himself. That was what Palpatine wanted to believe. But the truth moved beneath it all. Because the Force doesn't lie. And when Vader heard the name, he felt it. Not suspicion, recognition. He searched the records, not for orders, but for certainty. There were no official documents, no birth listings, no confirmed parentage. But the boy was strong in the Force, too strong, too focused, too much like him. He could fly before he could fight. He defied impossible odds. He led with instinct, not strategy, passion, not politics. And in his anger, he was dangerous. But in his fear, he was familiar. Vader stood in silence, the data pad dimming in his palm. There were no facts, no proof, only a feeling. And for the first time in years, that feeling was not hatred. It was hesitation. The Emperor called it opportunity. A powerful asset, a potential apprentice, a second chance at domination. But Vader didn't see a tool. He saw a mirror. And when Palpatine said the boy's name Skywalker with that cruel, casual confidence, Vader didn't speak. He only turned away. Because in that name, he heard something Palpatine didn't. He heard Padme. He heard himself. He heard the life that could have been. And for a moment, he wasn't sure which life was real. He kept his silence, but the thought grew. Each report from the Empire brought it closer. Each rebel sighting, each intercepted signal. The Force began to echo louder. Not in words, but in pull. Something was reaching for him, not out of anger, but out of need. And the armor could not silence it. Because the Force was not loyal to the Sith. It wasn't loyal to Jedi. It listened to balance, to pain, to truth. And now it was speaking again, calling him back. Not as Darth Vader, but as Anakin. He tried to dismiss it, tried to bury it beneath mission reports, fleet commands, and blood. But none of it quieted the sound. Because it wasn't just a voice. It was a heartbeat. One that matched his. When he finally saw the boy in person, on Hoth, the truth became harder to deny. He didn't look like Padme, not at first glance. But there was something in his eyes. Defiance without hatred. Bravery without cruelty. Hope without arrogance. And Vader didn't hate him. He hated that he couldn't. The boy escaped, the war continued. But something inside the Dark Lord had changed. The pursuit was no longer about conquest. It was about confirmation. And deep down, it was about connection. Because if the boy lived, then something inside him did too. He told himself it was strategy. That finding the boy was about power, about control, about replacing the Emperor. But deep inside the armor, another truth stirred, one he couldn't silence anymore. It wasn't power he wanted. It was presence. He wanted to see the boy again, to hear his voice, to look into his eyes and understand why the Force had given him back something he was certain it had taken away. Because the Force never gave without reason. And this time, it had given him Luke Skywalker. He searched relentlessly, not as the Emperor's enforcer, but as a hunter of ghosts. He followed traces, rumors, transmissions, glimpses of a young pilot in white, carrying a blue lightsaber that should have been destroyed on Mustafar. When he saw it through holophid footage, his world stopped. The hilt, the stance, the way the boy moved. It was his saber. It was Anakin's saber, passed to a son he never knew. The image burned through the armor. Not as pride, not as anger, but as pain, because that weapon had been meant to protect her, to protect Padme, and now it was being wielded by the child she had died to bring into the galaxy he had turned into a graveyard. The Emperor noticed the change. He always did. "There is a new enemy," Sidious said. "The son of Skywalker must not become a Jedi." The words echoed like thunder. The son of Skywalker. Vader didn't react. He didn't breathe. But something shifted. Sidious called the boy a threat. Vader called him something else. Something he hadn't spoken aloud in decades. "Mine." The Emperor's voice slithered with delight. Yes, he could be powerful. Perhaps he could replace you. It was a test, a dagger hidden in tone. But Vader understood the game. "Perhaps," he answered. Because behind the mask, the thought had already taken shape. If he could turn the boy, if he could make Luke see the truth, then the Emperor's reign would end. Together, they could destroy him. Rule the galaxy as father and son. But that wasn't the whole truth either. Because deep beneath that ambition, beneath the Sith doctrine, beneath every lesson of hate, there was something smaller, quieter, human. He didn't just want to rule with Luke. He wanted to know him. When their paths finally crossed again, it wasn't on a battlefield. It was aboard a star destroyer. Cold metal surrounded by the endless dark. The boy had been captured. Kneeled before him. Defiant. Fearless. "You don't believe me, do you?" Vader said softly. "That I am your father." The boy's silence said everything. Luke's eyes burned with denial. Not because he doubted the claim, but because he feared it was true. Vader could feel the conflict inside him. The same storm that once consumed Anakin. The same mixture of love and rage that tore the galaxy apart. He reached out through the Force, not to harm, but to feel. And what he felt was not rejection. It was sorrow. A familiar ache. A mirrored wound. Father and son. Separated by fate. Bound by pain. He offered him power. The same way Palpatine once had. "Join me, and together we can end this destructive conflict." But the words weren't for the galaxy. They were for him. A plea disguised as command. A wish buried beneath armor. He didn't want to rule with Luke. He wanted Luke to see him. To understand. To forgive. But Luke refused. He chose the light. He chose to fall rather than follow. Vader watched him plummet into the abyss, arms outstretched, and for a fleeting instant, the Dark Lord almost screamed, not out of anger, out of loss, because this time, he wasn't losing a wife, or a master, or a cause. He was losing his son. The sky was calm above Cloud City. But Vader had brought a storm with him. Every corridor echoed with silence. Every turn bent toward one goal. Luke Skywalker, not as a prisoner, not as an enemy, as something far more dangerous, a possibility. Vader had walked this path before. He had fought in cities, in temples, in sand and fire. But this place was different. It felt like a memory waiting to be rewritten. He didn't want to kill the boy. He wanted to shape him. But first, he had to break him. The plan had been simple: capture his friends, use their pain, lure the son to the father. Let emotion undo what Jedi teachings could not, just as it had undone Anakin Skywalker. And for a while, it worked. Luke came, not with an army, not with fear, but with hope. The kind of hope Vader had not seen in 20 years. The kind that blinded people to truth. The kind that Padme once carried in her voice before it died on Mustafar. He felt Luke's arrival before he saw him, like a tremor in the Force. Familiar, too familiar. He waited in the chamber beneath the city, not as a warlord, not even as a Sith, but as a man watching the future step through a door. And Luke did. Lightsaber drawn, eyes sharp, breath steady. He didn't know the truth yet. Not about the blood they shared, not about the pain they mirrored, but it didn't matter. Because Vader did. He spoke softly. "The Force is with you, young Skywalker." The boy stood his ground. "But you are not a Jedi yet." The first clash was precise, controlled, but it wasn't a battle, not really. It was a test. Vader pressed him, measured him, not just in strength but in spirit. He was watching for something, a flicker, a crack, an opening. He didn't want to kill the boy. He wanted to see him surrender, not in body, but in belief. To feel what Anakin once felt, that the galaxy's promises were lies, that trust was weakness, that the Jedi had built their temple on illusion. Luke struck harder, but Vader was patient. He led him through corridors, down metal bridges, into chambers of smoke and wind. Each step deeper into the city mirrored a step deeper into himself. And with every breath, he felt it. Luke was growing angrier. Good, because anger was memory, and memory was power. He saw it in the boy's eyes when Leia screamed, when Solo was taken, when Chewbacca was silenced by stormtroopers. He was beginning to feel what Vader lived with every day: that nothing in the galaxy stayed, that everything you love disappears. That peace was a lie carved into Jedi stone. When they reached the platform, the sky opened above them. Orange light, cold wind, distant clouds breaking apart. And Vader began the real fight. He struck fast, hard, relentless. Luke held on, barely, but not without fear. "You are beaten," Vader said. "It is useless to resist." But Luke did, because he still believed there was something left to win. Vader disarmed him, drove him to the edge, pressed him until there was nowhere left to run. Then he reached deeper, into truth. He didn't whisper, he didn't shout. He simply said it. "I am your father." The words split the sky. They broke Luke's world, broke what he thought was real, what he thought was right, what he thought was his. There was no weapon left in his hand, no Jedi code left to cling to, only silence and the sound of a heart breaking, not just the boy's, but the man who spoke the words. Because even now, Vader didn't gloat. He waited for the boy to accept it. to understand that pain, to see the galaxy not as it was but as he did, to reach out, not in hate, but in need. Together, they could end this war. Together, they could bury the past. But Luke chose something else. He let go of the platform, of the promise, of the Father who wanted him. He fell into the clouds, into the unknown. And Vader, for the first time in decades, reached out with something that felt like fear. Because now, he was alone again. Not because he killed the Jedi, not because he wore the mask, but because the only person who could have saved him had just let go. He thought it was over. The boy had fallen, not just from the platform, but from reach, from hope, from everything Vader tried to offer. The truth had been spoken. The line between enemy and son had been erased, and still, the boy had chosen death. Or so Vader thought. But Luke Skywalker didn't die. He survived the fall, the wind, the silence. He clung to a sensor array beneath the city, bloodied, broken, and lost. And in that moment, barely conscious, barely breathing, he called out through the Force. Not with words, not with commands, but with a feeling. Father. Vader felt it. The connection wasn't just real. It was alive, more than prophecy, more than fate. It was memory echoing through blood. Anakin Skywalker had once reached out through the Force to save lives. Now, his son did the same. But this time, he didn't answer. He stood in silence, in his chamber, staring into the darkness. The image of the boy's face haunted him. Not because he was weak, but because he was strong in the one way Vader could never be again. He believed. Even now, even after the truth had been revealed, and the lightsaber taken and the pain inflicted, Luke still held to something Anakin lost long ago, the belief that good could survive inside tragedy. Vader looked to the stars. Somewhere out there, the boy was being rescued. The Falcon had turned back. The princess had heard him. The friends had returned for him. And the hand that Vader had severed would be replaced. But what about the one Vader had reached out with? That hand remained empty. He had waited for the boy to fall into his arms. But the boy had fallen away instead. Like everything else. First his mother, then Padme, then Obi-Wan, and now his son. Each time he tried to save something, it slipped through his fingers. Not because he wasn't strong enough, but because he tried to hold it too tightly. He remembered what Sidious had told him. That attachments led to suffering. That love was weakness. That the Jedi had betrayed him. That he needed to let go. But now, in the dark, with nothing but breathing to keep him company, he felt something worse. Regret. Because Luke had not come to destroy him. He had come searching for truth. And Vader had given him a lie wrapped in shadow. I am your father, he had said. But what kind of father waits in the dark with a blade? What kind of father cuts off his son's hand to prove a point? He told himself it was necessary, that the galaxy needed order, that the Sith way was the only way left. But the truth was quieter. Vader wanted to be seen, not as a weapon, not as a monster, but as someone who still mattered. And Luke had seen him. Not the armor, not the title, but something inside the mask. That was why it hurt. Because in that moment, just for a second, he hadn't been Darth Vader. He had been Anakin Skywalker again. And he had failed, again, On the bridge of the executor, he said nothing. The stars outside didn't move. The crew didn't speak. He looked out into the void, and for the first time it looked back. The Force whispered, not from Sidious, not from the past, but from something deeper. The bond had been made. It couldn't be undone. And now, a crack had formed, not in the ship, not in the Empire, but in him, a hairline fracture in the black wall he had built around his heart. The boy had reached back, not with a blade, not with a scream, but with faith, and Vader didn't know what to do with that. He had built a life where fear was his shield, where pain was a weapon, where silence was safer than memory. But Luke's voice still echoed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry. It was soft, like Padme's had been, before the end. He closed his eyes. The armor stayed, the breathing stayed, the silence stayed. But something inside him didn't. It moved, just a little, and for now, that was enough. There was no hope left in the galaxy, not in the eyes of the people, not in the heart of the Jedi, and not in the soul of Darth Vader. But there was a boy who believed anyway. His name was Luke, and he walked into darkness without a weapon drawn, only the belief that his father still lived. The Emperor welcomed him like prey. Vader stood at his side like a shadow, and for the first time in years, he felt something inside him stir. Not because the boy fought, but because the boy refused to. Vader had faced many Jedi. He had crushed armies, burned temples, broken masters. But this boy knelt before him and called him Father. And it didn't feel like weakness. It felt like truth. On the Death Star, Luke didn't strike first. Not with hate, not with fear, even when Vader tried to provoke him. He only fought to defend his friends. Only swung in fear when his sister was threatened. And that fear, it was the same fear Vader had once felt, a long time ago, when he dreamed of Padme dying, when he asked the Council for help and was turned away. Vader had tried to stop death. This boy tried to stop hate. The duel should have been easy, but it wasn't. Not because Luke was stronger, but because Vader hesitated. Every time their blades crossed, the sound echoed deeper than metal. It echoed into memory. And when Luke's rage finally flared when he brought Vader down and severed his hand, he didn't finish it. He looked at the wires, then at his own hand, and he stepped back. "No," he said, "I am a Jedi, like my father before me." And in that moment, something broke. Not Luke, Vader. Because for the first time in decades, someone didn't beg him for mercy. Someone believed he still deserved it. The Emperor did not scream. He laughed. Because he saw the boy's refusal not as strength, but as failure. Palpatine had waited years for this moment, not to destroy Luke, but to replace Vader, to find a younger, more willing blade, one not broken by the past. And now, the boy stood in silence, his saber tossed aside, proud, defiant, Jedi. The Emperor only smiled. With a small gesture, lightning leapt from his fingers, cold, endless, and cruel. It hit Luke like a flood of pure agony. He screamed, fell to his knees, and called out through the pain. But he didn't beg. He called to his father. Vader didn't move. Not at first. He stood there, watching lightning bend his son's body into the floor, watching the Emperor take everything from him. The same way he once watched Padme fall. The same way he once watched Mace Windu die. The same way he had always watched, powerless, frozen, silent. But this time, it was different. This time, it wasn't a dream, it wasn't a prophecy, it wasn't a choice wrapped in politics or fear. It was his son. And his son was dying. The Emperor's laughter grew louder. Luke's cries weakened. And still, Vader didn't move. Not until he looked again, not with his eyes, but with whatever was left behind them. And in that flash of sound and light, he didn't see Luke. He saw himself. He saw a little boy on Tatooine. He saw a Jedi Padawan trying to do the right thing. He saw a man who had lost everything. And now, in the end, he saw the one thing he hadn't lost. Not yet. He turned, lifted the Emperor with both hands, and walked into the lightning. Palpatine screamed. Vader did not. Because the final lesson wasn't about power. It was about love. The lightning burned through him. Circuits melted, flesh tore. The armor that had kept him alive for decades began to die with him. But he didn't stop. He held the Emperor until the light swallowed them both. Until the voice that had ruled his life finally went silent. Until there was nothing left but the hum of power fading into air. And then, at last, he fell. The galaxy shifted. The dark side trembled. And Anakin Skywalker, the name long buried under ash, opened his eyes again. Luke crawled to him. He didn't see a monster now. He saw a man. Smoke rose from the suit. The mask sparked and hissed. The same breath that once haunted the galaxy was now uneven, fragile, breaking. "Father," Luke said. Vader tried to speak, but no sound came. He lifted a trembling hand. Not to strike, not to command, just to touch his son's face. There was no helmet now, no shadow. Only the ruin of a man who had spent half a lifetime trying to kill what he loved. And a son who refused to let that be the ending. "You were right," the broken voice finally whispered. "You were right about me." Luke shook his head. Tears fell against the armor. He couldn't accept it. But the truth had already been spoken. "I'm sorry," Anakin said. "Tell your sister, you were right." His eyes softened. The blue returned. The darkness, at last, began to fade. The man who once destroyed worlds now asked for only one thing: to see his son with his own eyes. Luke removed the mask. And for the first time since Mustafar, Anakin Skywalker breathed free air. He smiled. Not with triumph, not with regret, but with peace. Then his body grew still. And the armor, the prison that had carried his hate, became empty. The Death Star burned around them. But inside the hangar, there was only silence. Luke dragged his father's body through smoke and ash. Not the armor, not the machine. The man. He couldn't save him. But he wouldn't leave him. Not again. Above Endor, the battle was ending. But for Luke Skywalker, something greater had just begun. His father had returned. Not in power, not in glory, but in choice. And the galaxy would never know. The rebellion would sing of victory. The Jedi would become legend. But the boy who had once been a slave, a Jedi, a Sith, he would vanish in flame and wind. Luke built the pyre himself. No grand ceremony, no Jedi council. Just wood, fire, memory. The body burned, the armor cracked. And in the flames, the shadow of Darth Vader was finally erased. But Anakin Skywalker, he remained. Not in body, but in the Force. Later that night, on the moon of Endor, Luke stood alone beneath the trees. He looked up and saw them. Obi-Wan, Yoda, and beside them, Anakin. Not as Vader, not in black, but as the man he once was. Younger, whole, free. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. In his son's eyes, he had already said everything. Luke nodded, and Anakin smiled. The stars burned quietly above them. The war was over, but the legacy was not. A father had returned. A son had believed. And in the end, the Force was in balance. Not because of power, not because of prophecy, but because one man chose love over fear, and because a boy walked into the dark and reminded him who he really was. This is the story of Anakin Skywalker, the Jedi who fell, the Sith who rose, and the father who, in the final hour, remembered.